Hey guys, Alias here. This is the second in the AshenBound universe saga. If you haven't checked out the first one, be sure to go check that out. This is a gritty, grimy, Souls-like second-person experience, and it's been a lot of fun to write. Also want to give a quick shout out to Dreadful Anecdotes for doing the voice of our Last Bellkeeper, and my partner did the voice for the Matriarch. I hope you enjoy the story. Thank you for being here. The roots of the Craven Monk's tree spiral around you, extending like blackened veins into the ground. You slip through the hollow at its base and descend into a cavernous passage, the wood damp and smooth beneath your fingers. The walls exude a faint, sour odor that clings to your skin. As you descend, the air thickens with the stale perfume of wet soil. It feels less like a tree and more like something's carcass, buried for centuries in a dreamless darkness. Light quickly fades behind you, smothered by the twists and turns of the tunnel. Now and then, a sound carries through the darkness, and you can almost feel the reverberations, like their tremors spreading through the ancient stone. Lichen and small roots begin to drape across your path, and you raise an arm to keep them clear of your face. As you move deeper, your hand grazes the wall again, and the texture is wrong, almost like the surface of skin. You draw back instinctively, the sensation lingering on your fingertips. Faint carvings snake across the walls here and there, old sigils warped by time, patterns as cryptic as the mind that left them. The space around you widens, opening into a cavernous hollow bathed in an eerie glow. Bioluminescent fungi cling to the walls in irregular patches, casting faint, uneven light over the tangle of roots and slick stone beneath your feet. A blackened lake borders the ground, the surface shivering with the wakes and ripples that break the stillness, disturbed by unseen movements. The air feels dense, burdened by an unsettling quiet. And ahead of you, rising from the cavernous lake, is a sprawling mass of ruination, a strange, skeletal delineation of crumbling towers and twisted stone. A city has somehow sunken here, swallowed by the earth. The silence is almost too deep. It's the kind that listens. The pathway slopes downward, the ground slick with wet moss and dark viscous algae clinging to every stone. Each step brings you closer to the towering shape that looms out of the cavern's mist. It's a ragged outline stretching upward. Pale, ghostly light leaks out from the top of the tower's upper reaches, casting dim reflections onto the water below. A shadow passes in front of the belfry's windows. Something or someone is up there. Crossing what remains of an arched stone bridge, you step carefully, wary of its crumbling stone and the way the structure sinks slightly underfoot, reluctant to support anything living. Wisps of bioluminescent fungi cling to the bridge's edges, illuminating a faint path over the water. The otherwise intense stillness of the cavern is uncanny. Your gaze remains fixed on the tower, growing more imposing with each step. The Watcher's belfry stands like an ancient sentinel, its walls scored with cracks and overrun by dark moss. At the foot of the belfry, the wooden door hangs slightly ajar, and the doorway yawns, framing an impenetrable darkness that drinks whatever little light dares reach it. The tang of wet stone mingles with something sweet and cloying, a scent that clings to your throat, reminding you of stale incense and dried herbs. Stepping over the threshold, there is no echo of your footsteps. Each step feels swallowed whole by the tower's embrace. A faint, scuttling sound shifts in the dark just beyond sight, but when you look closer, it fades, confirming that the belfry holds more than just you. A narrow spiral staircase winds upward, barely visible in the faint light that filters in from the fractured windows high above. Each step creaks underfoot, and you keep one hand braced against the wall, your fingers occasionally catching on its crumbling surface. As you climb, a sound stirs, notes that seem to drift from somewhere above, a distant tune. You pause, listening, but then it fades, blending back into the silence. After another moment, you continue. The staircase spirals round and round as you ascend to the top. And when you reach the top, you're greeted by a pale glow that spreads across a small room. It reveals uneven edges of stone walls, which hold smudged, dark streaks, words written but long since obscured. In the center of the space, a figure waits, draped in tattered remnants of what once might have been a uniform, frayed at the edges and weightless in the silence. The figure watches you, unmoving, and when he speaks, his voice is thin, soft-spoken.
Another one? Come to listen? Come to seek? They always find their way here.
The words settle into the quiet, lingering a moment longer than they should. The figure's gaze remains, unblinking, before his mouth curves into roughly which could be a smile or a grimace. His hand, long and insubstantial, lifts to reveal a low, roughly built table that stands beside him. Strange items lay across its surface, obscured in faded cloth and glints of sea-green light, each one casting faint shapes that twist in the silence. He regards you with a knowing look.
The ones who reach this place, they are always in need.
His gaze shifts to the table.
I keep these things for those who still have enough hope to wish.
One spectral hand drifts over the wares, gliding above a small pendant carved from polished sea glass, a dark dagger crusted with coral, and an object wrapped so densely in fabric it's nearly shapeless. The pendant gleams, catching light from some unseen source, and its translucent surface reveals faint cracks where pale green glimmers seep through.
The siren glass pendant. This pendant grants vision to unveil concealed paths shrouded by illusions, if you possess the courage to look.
The edges shine as he speaks, though the light within feels less like comfort and more like a memory within the silent pool of the tower. His hand moves to the dagger, barely touching the coral-encrusted hilt.
Wailing coral dagger,
he says, his voice as sharp as glass.
This will slow the steps of those who stalk the quiet places, and its edge carries a chill. Strike true, and watch as it binds what walks unwelcome.
As his hand hovers above it, a faint, cold vibration seems to fill the air, a sound that rises like the beginning of a song before slipping away. Finally, he rests his gaze upon the fabric-wrapped object, almost reverent.
This,
he says, pausing,
is for those who accept the bargain of Zaal itself. It is not for the faint-hearted.
His words carry an almost weightless quality. His gaze lifts, meeting yours. An invitation or a warning. It's impossible to tell.
These gifts come with prices known to few, but perhaps you are one who seeks beyond the veil,
he says, almost like a riddle. The Bellkeeper's gaze then shifts, tracing over your form. His eyes narrow slightly, and his lips curve into that faint, knowing expression again, an almost pitying look.
I see you come empty-handed,
he murmurs, the words soft and strangely resonant.
No offerings, no tokens, not yet.
He pauses, his attention drifting, recalling some distant memory. He gestures with one spectral hand, fingers gliding through the cold air.
If you seek to return, perhaps you may find what I require within the ruins ahead.
He continues.
In the depths of this city lies an old haunt of Zaal's nobility, the place where they reveled and drowned themselves in excess.
He pauses, his gaze unfocusing for a moment.
The Royal Bathhouse,
he names it at last.
A den where Zaal's most privileged gambled and surrounded themselves with courtesans, indulging in opulence and the warmed flesh of women. They gambled away entire fortunes, then sedated themselves with dark elixirs, hypnotics, and hedonistic fornication.
His eyes narrow, his voice darkly lowering.
They thought they could drink and smoke and bed their way out of death itself. Their illusions of safety were as thick as scents and smoke, and yet the women and men who indulged their whims became no more untouchable than the beggars outside.
He studies you, letting the silence build.
They lost themselves in that bathhouse, drowning in pleasures, drowning in each other, ignoring the waters that rose around them.
His gaze sharpens, as if issuing a warning.
But if you have the nerve to enter, you may find relics there, tokens of wealth or pleasure that still hold value, but you may also find what remains of the overindulgent and those who cater to them.
He straightens, distancing himself from the memory.
Bring me something worthy of trade, and we may yet find an agreement.
And with that, he gestures towards the door behind you, the faintest motion of dismissal. The descent from the belfry feels longer than the climb. The Royal Bathhouse, the Bellkeeper had called it. They thought they could drink and smoke and bed their way out of death itself. Whatever remnants lie in that place are not likely to offer sanctuary, and you question whether the riches within are even worth it. Reaching the bottom, you leave the belfry and step into the thick fog blanketing Zaal, the drowned city. The cavern emerges, swallowing the belfry's crooked spire behind a wall of mist. Your footsteps echo faintly across the dark stone streets. Small plants have burrowed their way through the cracks, clawing for a life of their own. The cityscape spreads out before you, a maze of semi-submerged pathways and sunken homes. The pale fungi light the streets in patches, casting pools of yellowish light that reveal crumbled statues and pillars. Your senses remain on edge, as every sound seems magnified in the otherwise deathly silence. A strange clicking sound catches your attention as you pass an alleyway. You take a moment to pause and look down the alley. You don't see anything that looks threatening, and curiosity leads you astray. But as you move through the darkened stretch, the unfamiliar sound splits into silence. You freeze, instinctively reaching for a weapon, but it's already too late. A heavy metal spear flies at you from the ledge above. The front barely misses your face, and a quick flash of gratitude emerges in appreciation for your reflexes. But then something on the back end of it buries itself deep in your shoulder, and you're wrenched backwards, off your feet. Pain ignites in your shoulder as a bulky iron hook digs in, momentum dragging you with brutal force. You hit the ground hard, the impact robbing you of your breath. The creature from above drops down, landing quietly, its crude weapon embedded in your flesh. You try to dislodge it yourself, but the hook holds fast, digging in as if the weapon itself refuses to release you. You catch sight of your attacker, a man it seems, shrouded entirely in cloth. His face is hidden behind a pale, expressionless and smooth mask. Even the eyes are covered, concealed by thin, gauzy fabric that suggests he sees without needing sight. His clothing is pristine despite the slime and muck of the city. The garb has notable complex knotwork along the arms and shoulders, as if sewn in ritual rather than necessity. He moves with an eerie deliberance, betraying urgency even as he approaches you and casually reaches for the handle of the thing pinning you down. You lash out reflexively, the fighter spirit, your hand connecting with his mask in an attempt to shove him back. But his motion doesn't falter. He grabs the base and yanks the hook, pulling it out of you. You feel your arm go numb, feeling nothing beyond your shoulder, though the hole burns with a pain akin to chemical fire that radiates across your neck and scalp. He turns the hook over, standing over you, and casually drives it into the backside of the same shoulder, sliding it in just under your shoulder blade. It instantly becomes harder to breathe as his hook tears your lung. You scream out, completely caught off guard by this brutal assault. He lifts you to your feet with the hook and pulls you closer, as if he means to study you, his head tilting side to side. In one swift movement, he releases the hook from your shoulder, stepping back and fluidly arcs it in a perfect circle to swing down towards you again. The jagged metal flashes as it soars towards your head, and you barely twist aside, causing the hook to graze your ear, but it slams into your injured shoulder instead. And you know you're as good as dead when you feel the bones collapse under the strike. Panic sets quickly, reeling from this attack, your vision narrowing to just a ghastly figure before you, his movements still calm and unhurried, a stark contrast to yours. Every shallow breath you take comes scraping through your chest. Blood runs from your mouth as well as down your arm and chest, soaking into the fabric and dripping off of your fingertips. You clutch the wound, barely able to keep your balance. But he steps closer, the hook swinging lightly in his hand, almost playfully. With only your defiant will left, you push back. You lurch forward chaotically, throwing a clumsy punch at his face, but he easily sidesteps, batting it away with the back of his hand. This makes you spin, and he quickly grabs your injured arm with his free hand and yanks down. The numbness explodes in raw agony, tears fill your eyes, and your knees buckle. He releases you only to swing the lump of iron again, and he's aiming for the back of your neck. You throw yourself onto your back, half as a dodge and half because you can't stay up anymore. Your hand flails to your side as you sprawl out on the ground, and you feel the cold, jagged grip of the bone cleaver in your grasp. Your hand grips the bone cleaver, though not of your own accord, fingers securing the handle. Your arm bulges and wriggles violently before it slashes the hook away mere moments before it crushes your face. The bone cleaver then moves in a way that looks as though it is the one in control, and your arm is simply along for the ride. It travels up the shaft of the hooked weapon and catches the man in white off guard. The bone blade bites deep, embedding itself just under his collarbone. A fluid, dark and viscous, but not blood, seeps around the edge of the wound. His head shudders towards you, mask turned in a look of confusion or shock. His movements falter as his arm begins to spasm, and a faint tremble runs through his entire body. And you know that shiver all too well. The nerve flayers did the same to you. The flayed nerves effect. A sensation then pulses through the handle of the bone cleaver, and then what sounds like a dying gasp erupts from the sword, carrying with it a strange warmth that soaks into your fingers. You watch, horrified and entranced, as the blood pooling from his wound seems to flow into the blade itself, dark branches of energy siphoning from his body into yours. Your attacker's body shudders again, his grip on the pole hook loosening as if the strength is draining from his limbs. His arm twitches uncontrollably and his fingers open and close, moving slower each time. Realizing the effect, you twist the blade and thrust it deeper, triggering another, more violent spasm. He seizes as the bone cleaver continues to leech life from him. That strange warmth seeping in from the blade reaches deep into your hand, coursing up your arm and spreading through your body. Your heartbeat slows, its wild pounding quieting as the warmth spreads into your chest, bringing with it an unexpected calm. The pain in your shoulder lessens, and the sharp burning fading into a dull ache, and each breath becomes easier, steadier. The torn muscles along your shoulder knit together, and the bones rearranging with them as everything is moved into place. Your vision clearing as though lifted from a haze. You blink, feeling your awareness sharpen, the blood once staining your skin receding. The sensation of strength returns to your limbs, like water rushing through parched earth. You can feel the vitality of your attacker's body pouring into you, fueling your own as his movements grow weaker. The numbness in your arm dissolves entirely, replaced by a thrumming energy that steadies your grip on the bone cleaver. Now finally, you pull the bone cleaver free, and the man collapses forward, paralyzed but still breathing in shallow, frantic gulps. Then he begins that strange clicking, the faint noise emitted in short bursts, an attempt to locate you perhaps. But the paralysis holds, his body remaining a prisoner to the bone cleaver's dark power. With shaking hands and shallow breaths, you grab his hooked weapon, and you back away further, putting the shadows between yourself and the motionless figure. The taste of survival is bitter. You turn and disappear into the mist-shrouded streets of Zaal. Once a safe distance away, you assess your wounds. You take a shaky breath, pressing your hand against the freshly healed shoulder. The pain is gone, but as you slide your fingertips along the skin, you realize something is terribly wrong amidst the miracle. Beneath your touch, the flesh feels cold, unnaturally so, as if the heat of life has left it. You slide your garb off of your shoulder, exposing the place where the hook had first torn through the muscle and bone. What remains is a scar, a jagged line of tissue but deep black against your skin. The edges of the scar are stark and flawless. Your other hand moves around your ribs to your back, probing the spot beneath your shoulder blade where the hook had punctured your lung. And here too, the scar lies. As you continue to move throughout Zaal, your steps are cautious, each one testing the ground as you pass through narrow alleys and over weathered bridges that barely hold their form. The water is thick with silt, hiding whatever might lie below. Long stretches of brittle stone reach across wide channels, the stones choked by tangled roots that feel like skeletal hands reaching up. The echoes of your footsteps are the only response, the silence woven into the walls as though the city holds its breath around you. Ahead, you glimpse a collapsed tower leaning against an ancient courthouse. The stone facade bears faded reliefs of citizens from a long-dead Zaal, women draped in flowing robes, masked figures locked in an endless dance, nobles exchanging wagers. Though worn, their empty eyes and still expressions seem to mourn the days when these streets teemed with life, before the water rose and the city sank. Passing beneath an archway draped in vines, you see engravings worn to barely a whisper of lines. The archway opens into a plaza, half submerged, where the remnants of an ancient market lie scattered. Fallen stalls, broken pottery, and overturned tables, now woven with moss. Twin statues rise over the plaza, skeletal and tall, their arms raised in silence. Headdresses fan out from their faces, framing them in stark frozen beauty. Their blank gazes draw your attention, almost like a warning is carved into the stone. You move around the plaza, feeling drawn toward a low building with a sunken roof. This structure is one of the rare ones still standing, its dark stone walls adorned with faded banners that cling like whispers to the surface. Their symbols are complex and faintly unsettling, a serpent with intricately rendered scales and a single watchful eye. This was once the noble apothecary, a place where Zaal's elite procured poisons, cures, and other indulgences. The image of nobles huddled here in shadow fills your mind. The thrill of secrecy, their last comforts as the flood crept higher just outside. The air grows thick with an unexpected sweetness, a delicate thread of incense winding through the damp ruin of Zaal. It is faint, but intoxicating, curling through the molded stench laced with spices and herbals that stir strange passions in your chest. The scent tugs at you, quiet yet potent, alluring and elusive. Drawn forward, you descend a series of shallow, worn steps, your path winding deeper into the silence. The mist thickens here, spiraling up from blackened pools that seem to drink in the light. Every breath fills your senses with that haunting perfume, an infusion of smoke and sweetness blending with earth and ruin. The notes spiral around you, rich and layered, until the dampness feels like nothing more than a curtain, parting to reveal something hidden, something worth finding. Ahead, the eclipsed form of a large structure rises, its outline half lost in the thickening fog. The fragrance grows, warmth weaving around you like the embrace of a long-forgotten lover. Beneath the faded arches, a new perfume lingers in the air, inviting you to venture inside. The building's entrance lies at the end of a long, crumbling staircase. You approach slowly, your steps cautious. The once grand stone steps slick with algae and covered in tangles of invasive vines that twist through the cracks and spill over the edges. Stagnant water pools at the base of each step, coating your boots as you make your way up. The scent of incense grows stronger, a rich sweetness slipping through the chill of Zaal's damp air, carrying a warmth that seems opposed to everything around it. At the top of the stairs, you find yourself before a pair of immense doors. Their design is intricate, elegant, the kind of entry that once might have led to places reserved for only Zaal's wealthiest. Much of the wood is dark, soaked through from years spent exposed to the cavern's damp air, softened and warped by age. But you catch flashes of vibrant paint, reds and golds and blues hidden beneath grime and decay. The carvings along the wood are faded yet unmistakable. Dragons, winding around one another, their jaws open in silent insolence. As you reach for the handle, your hand hesitates. The door is cold beneath your fingers, the texture rough and worn, but as you push it open, you feel a warmth radiate from it, subtle, but undeniable. The door opens more smoothly than expected, oiled and cared for, and the faintest sound of distant music can be heard in the low murmur of dripping water from above. Inside, an entry hall stretches out, its walls thick with creeping moss and fungi clinging to damp stone. The floor beneath you is uneven, broken stones jutting up from cracked foundations, and yet some of the intricate tiling peeks through the grime, flashes of polished marble catching faint light and offering smooth reflections. Murals, dulled by time, take on richer hues, their edges growing sharper as colors emerge. Scenes of feasting nobles, musicians, dancers. Here and there, the ancient murals pulse with shades of deep reds and royal blues. Fragments of life returning to the walls in pieces, being brought back from the brink of ruin. Ahead lies a pair of ornately carved doors, half open, the details in their woodwork clear, and the intricate and exotic patterns framed by gilded lines that seem freshly painted. You push one of the doors open, and it swings wide, revealing the first ballroom. Silk drapes hang along the walls, and though few have fallen, their fabric wet and frayed, while others retain a velvety sheen and their colors undiminished. Broken tables and toppled chairs litter the room, covered in dust and ash, but are intermingling with cared-for luxuries, fresh velvet cushions and low couches. The scent of incense grows deeper, headier, as it fills the room, twisting with the faintest hints of wine, the notes too subtle and fleeting to be real. A feeling of warmth presses against you as you take another step, and then another. One more step. And soon you're in the heart of the bathhouse. The decay has vanished entirely. A crystal chandelier hangs from the ceiling, scattering a warm, diffused light across the room. Grand arches line the walls, their surface painted in brilliant hues that seem to glow in the soft light. Every detail crisp and flawless. Murals of masked nobles dancing and laughing wrap around the walls, alive with vibrant color, capturing the elegance of lives they once led. You move forward, following the sound of laughter, soft music weaving through the air. Ahead, great pools shimmer with clear water, their surfaces adorned with flower petals that drift and swirl, releasing delicate scents. Figures recline around the pools, dressed in flowing cloth, their faces serene, half hidden by masks, and their eyes flicking towards you with a quiet welcome. The faint laughter and soft music wraps around you like silk as you take a step closer to the pools, drawn in by the heady scent of incense and flowers, the warmth settling into your bones. Figures in flowing velvet glide along the edges of the room, their movements graceful, heads turned, the delicate masks obscuring their features. Some sit reclined on satin cushions, others stand beside gilded columns, raising glasses as they watch you. But the prickling sense of unease tugs at your mind. Something quietly wrong beneath the bathhouse's allure. You meet the gaze of a noble reclining by the water, his mask adorned with jewels that glitter in the chandelier's light. His eyes are hidden, but his head turns to follow your every movement, never breaking its perfect alignment with you. You look away, feeling the stare linger even as you shift your focus. The noblewoman at his side stands and then drifts away, her back turned, but her head remains fixed in your direction, neck twisted unnaturally as her gaze stays locked on you. She glides away, her body carrying her further into the room, but her head still remains twisted. You move farther into the room, and the figures around you drift in and out. Their steps are almost languid as they stroll past, but you begin to notice every head pivots sharply, and every gaze follows you. Some of the figures sit by the edge of gardens, their masks still fixed on you even as they lean over to smell flowers. The rest of their bodies poised and relaxed, yet their heads are locked in unbroken attention. You step back, feeling a new warmth in the air that's growing stifling, thick and sweet incense that swarms within your lungs. A low murmur of laughter ripples through the room, each voice dipping into an amused, hollow note. The figures continue to drift and sway in their perpetual elegance, yet their heads remain, all of them facing you directly. A gentle melody rises, soft and lilting, threading through the air. One by one, the women step into view, extending graceful hands towards one another, their forms nude, draped in nothing but the flickering play of candlelight on smooth skin. The sleek movements of their limbs reveal their immaculate figures in glimpses, emerging from the perfume and smoke that fills the air. Without realizing how, you find yourself among them, drawn into the slow rhythm of the dance as the music swells. You move into step, your hand meeting another's, a noble woman's skin cool and meek beneath your touch. She draws you close, her breath shallow as her fingers glide across your lips, her scent rich with rose and spice and intoxicating warmth that clouds your thoughts. Another then reaches for you, her hand gliding along your arm in a gentle spin that leads you to her, deeper into the dance, now fully alive around you. The tempo quickens, and with it so too does the dance. The nobles around you glide and twirl, their laughter mingling with the notes, eyes shining behind masks of opal, jade, and gold. You're swept along, whirling through the hall, your senses alive with each touch, each scent, each intoxicating breath of incense and candle wax and wine. The world around you blurs into color and movement and pleasure. Green silk, ruby lips, hands gliding along your arms and shoulders, the faint taste of some sweet forbidden fruit passed from a tongue to yours. With each new partner, the sensations deepen. One noble woman rests a cool hand on the nape of your neck, guiding you through a sharp turn. Another draws you close, the edge of her mask brushing your cheek, her laugh soft, a warm breath skimming against your ear. Your skin tingles, each stroke of satin and velvet a thrill, urging you onward. Immersed into the frenzy of sensation, the music swirls around you, sinking into your bones. The dance quickens again, now becoming a whirlwind of laughter and sweet nothings, spinning you from delicate body to delicate body, yet still their masked faces always turning toward you. Your heart races as the music crescendos, your feet moving faster, your senses drowning in warmth and scent. The room spins, the nobles' laughter rising, their voices layered in strange harmony, weaving into the melody. Their faces a haze of masks and flashing eyes. You are whirling through an endless sea of skin and scents and shapes, swept deeper into the enchantment of the bathhouse, a slave to the pulse of desire. A new noble woman draws you in close, her gloved hand resting just above your heart. Her firm pressure beneath the satin gloves pulls you even deeper. Her mask is pale and ornate, studded with jewels that glint in the hazy light, and her lips part in a small, delicate smile as she holds you, her perfume dizzying. It's so sweet. Her fingers dig into your chest, and she pulls at your shirt, briefly revealing your blackened scar, and her smile falters. Her expression shifts from one of allure to disgust. The music seems to waver, and she pulls back with a gasp, her voice tearing through the soft melody with a shriek that scrapes like metal on stone. "Not noble!" she cries, the words gargled and bubbling, warping in her mouth, echoing around the hall. The other dancers freeze, bodies, like their heads snapping toward you. Every woman, some covering their chests and waists, glistening with sweat, faces you with a look of revulsion. The noblewoman's hands drop away from you, but she does not step back. Instead, her neck elongates, bending at an impossible angle, her mask slipping to one side, the delicate jewels adorning it catching the light, making the warped expression even more unpleasant. Her fingers stretch toward you again, trembling. She's repelled, but compelled, drawn to touch you despite her horror. Around you, the other dancers are no longer frozen. They move to you from across the floor with hands outstretched, every eye fixed on you with terrible intensity. The music has stopped, leaving only the soft sound of silk and skin brushing against marble as one by one they reach for you, their mouths widening beneath their masks, revealing darkness faintly gleaming beneath. You stumble back, heart pounding, but they close in. The woman who cried out shudders, her voice hissing, repeating with quiet, fervent rage, "Not noble, not noble, not noble." They begin to scramble, clawing and clambering over one another with mindless, disgusted anger, some falling to the ground only to be trampled by others. Their bones crack and snap beneath the weight of each other, and yet they continue, their arms outstretched, eyes fixed on you, their mouths twisted open in boundless shock. The noblewomen drag themselves across the floor, some crawling with broken limbs that bend the wrong way, some staggering on fractured legs that can barely hold them upright. Their wailing grows louder, echoing in the vast chamber, filling the air with a madness that wraps around you, frenzied and relentless. Figures grasp at your clothing, fingers digging into your arms, pulling, tearing, and others squirm and twist to claw their way closer, their bodies collapsing as they surge forward. In the chaos, glimpses of their decayed faces flash before you. Half-rotted jaws, eyeless sockets, weeping dark fluid teeth bared in expressions of rage and sorrow. Some laugh, a high, keening sound that cuts through the shrieking, hollow and desperate. The air fills with the stench of rot and the sound of splintering bones. Their bodies are a relentless tide, each one driven by the same furious, unbreakable compulsion. Not noble! The words slam into you, echoing from every corner, filling your ears, your mind. Hands grab at your shoulders, clawing down your arms, pulling you closer as the cries swell a chorus of wails and desperate screams. You struggle, but their grips tighten, nails raking into your skin, and their distorted faces press in, closing the gap, suffocating you in their shrieking fury. Their twisted, unholy refrain echoing as they drag you down into the darkness. Not noble, not noble. Just as the closest hand rakes across your shoulder, a dark blur flashes through the mob. And suddenly one of the courtesans is ripped away with a force that silences the others. In a heartbeat she appears, a figure of violent beauty and terrifying strength. Her form swathed in flowing fabric that trails behind her, as if she is carved from darkness itself. Her eyes burn with a fury as she surveys the nobles around you, and in a swift, commanding motion she tears into them. Her movements a streak of rage as she strikes at each one, her hands an unforgiving blade. She pulls them from you one by one, her anger an unrestrained tempest. A wreckage of desiccated flesh falls to the floor, and the courtesans squirm in terror. Crying out in woeful voices, their wails fill the hall as she casts them down, their broken bodies strewn around you, lifeless and ruined. Finally, the last of them falls silent, reduced to a shivering heap at the matriarch's feet. She stands there, breathing in deep, her gaze shifting slowly to you, and her expression softens, and the blazing fury in her eyes is replaced by something reverent, almost adoring. The silence around you thickens, and you feel the weight of her attention settle on you like a tangible force, as if she is beholding you anew. She steps forward, lowering herself slowly, gracefully, until she is kneeling before you. Her head tilts back, and in her eyes you catch a gleam of awe as she studies you. When she speaks, her voice is a low, silken invitation, every syllable laced with reverence.
"Forgive them,"
she whispers.
"They knew not what they saw."
The matriarch rises, her hand reaching out, but stopping just shy of touching you. Her fingertips hovering in the air, trembling with a careful restraint.
"A king does not deserve the grasping hands of the desperate."
She hums, each word an invocation.
"Nor should he be marred by the unworthy."
Her expression almost tender, a soft smile curving her lips as she inclines her head slightly.
"You bear a crown unseen, one not easily recognized, but I sense its weight."
She straightens, her demeanor respectful.
"Let no one here forget your presence, nor forget what they owe you."
She glances down at the scattered remains of the courtesans, disdain etched into her flawless features. Her skin shines with radiance, smooth and flawless, her face shifting with an ethereal beauty. Jewels gleam at her throat and wrists, shimmering like stardust, casting faint sparks of opalescent light. Her hair tumbles down her shoulders in waves, every feature a vision of beauty that borders on surreal. She still wears that soft smile, her eyes dark and knowing beneath long, glistening lashes, holding you in an unbreakable gaze. A flicker of heat rises within you as the matriarch's hands hover over your wrist, her touch lingering just beyond reach. Her gaze meets yours, wrapping around you like the lingering sweetness of the incense and smoke. Your eyes travel over the line of her jaw, and the fullness of her lips, and the intoxicating depth of her eyes. Sensing your stare, her smile spreads, the softness in her gaze melding with a quizzical look.
Allow me to make amends for their transgressions.
She speaks softly, her voice a purr of invitation. She tilts her head in a graceful bow, and then offers her hand.
Come,
she says, the word woven with silk.
I will honor the crown with treasures only I may bestow.
Her fingers brush lightly against your wrist as she guides you through the hall, every step revealing her elegance and command. The soft rustle of her gown drifts open as she walks, her soft and supple body revealing itself to you unabashed. She guides you through the quiet as the path curves towards an arched doorway framed in dark ancient stone. She glances over her shoulder, hips swaying, the scarlet corner of her lower lip caught between her ivory teeth, her gaze promising that what lies beyond will more than atone for her followers' folly. You follow her into the room, where a cool breath of air greets you, wrought with the scent of aged leather and ancient metal. Light pools through the paper windows and waves around the relics of untold worth. Each artifact feels alive with latent power, resonating in subtle exclamations that tug at your attention. Your gaze sweeps over elaborate statues, gilded armaments, and tapestries faded with time but alive with stories etched in vibrant threads. The vault holds a quiet reverence, each item placed with meticulous care, awaiting hands that recognize their worth. On a velvet-draped pedestal rests a polished dagger with an onyx blade, its hilt traced with runes that change color as you pass, as though aware of your presence. The craftsmanship is unlike anything you've ever seen, its surface smooth, yet laced with etchings that seem to hold a lifetime of stories. Next to it lies a collection of rings, each bearing a different stone. One catches your eye, a deep crimson gem that pulses faintly with a slender band of blackened silver, as though holding on to the last embers of an ancient life. And another ring cradles a stone as clear as water, and as you tilt it towards the light, faint ripples seem to move across the metal, a curious effect. Further along, a pair of bracers forged from dark metal are etched with images of coiled serpents, their eyes set with emeralds that seem to watch you in silence. Each scale and curve is rendered in exquisite detail, the metalwork delicate yet sturdy. Nearby, a collection of weathered scrolls rests on a low shelf, their surface is covered in faded symbols that seem to shift just at the edge of perception. Stories from forgotten realms held within their fibers. And finally, your gaze settles on a mask, wrought in silver and crowned with a single, faintly glowing gem set at its center. Its light is cool, almost lunar, casting a pale glow across the metal's intricate filigree. Within the gem's depths lies a subtle shimmer, as though the entire night sky had been captured in that single stone. The mask exudes a quiet power, its aura tangible even from a distance. As you move among these treasures, the Matriarch watches you with a steady, knowing gaze, as though each movement speaks to her of unspoken desires and possibilities. The Matriarch's eyes shift to the weapon at your side, the bone cleaver, its edges darkened and its surface rough, scarred from the battles with the Bone Sovereign and the Man in White. A hint of disdain flickers in her gaze, her lips curving into a faint smile.
That weapon,
she says, her tone almost pitying,
has served you, no doubt. But a king deserves more than a tool as crude as that.
She leans closer, her gaze lingering on the weapon before returning to you, her expression thoughtful, almost indulgent.
It lacks refinement, and artistry worthy of one who bears the Bone Sovereign's crown.
She steps back toward the array of treasures, her hand hovering over an elegant blade nestled within a dark sheath on a raised pedestal. The sword's hilt is finely wrought, a latticework of precious metals that winds around a gem inlaid at the center, dark as obsidian, pulsing faintly with an energy that feels both controlled and powerful.
Consider this.
she says.
Forged in the halls of Zaal itself.
She smiles, her fingers lightly brushing the hilt.
It would answer to you, just as you command the crown.
She steps back, allowing you to approach, her gaze never leaving yours.
A fitting blade for a king.
You step closer to the pedestal, your eyes drawn to the weapon as if it were calling to you. The hilt's lattice work, finely woven from silver and obsidian, gleams under the faint spectral light, its surface smooth yet charged with an energy that feels almost alive. The gem at its center pulses softly, a rhythm that feels strangely familiar, its dark light resonating within you, stirring the same instincts as the bone cleaver. Your hand wraps around the hilt, the metal cool and heavy in your grip. As you draw the blade, a black, mirrored edge emerges, reflecting the dim light and sharp spectral lines. The weight is perfect, balanced, yet brimming with more secrets. You feel a faint, jagged pull, a sensation that coils up your arm and settles in your chest, reminiscent of the bone cleaver's dark pull, but tempered, controlled. It's as if this weapon possesses a will of its own, an urge to obey, but also to challenge, testing the one who dares to wield it. The blade catches the dim light in strange, shifting patterns, revealing runes etched along its edge, symbols that pulse faintly in time with the gem's hilt. As you turn the weapon, a low thrumming fills your senses, a muted yet familiar hunger in the depths, ancient and insistent. The Matriarch's gaze lingers on the blade in your hand, admiration softening her dark eyes.
That weapon was forged in Zaal's twilight era.
She begins, her voice hushed yet rich with reverence.
When the city's power began to wane, and the nobles, desperate to retain their dominion, sought forces older and darker than their gilded halls could contain. Its edge was tempered in ritual fires, and the gem, well, that gem was embedded by hands who understood the depths of what they summoned.
She circles you slowly, her gaze never leaving the blade.
It was crafted not just to protect, but to dominate, to bind the will of its foes as surely as it binds itself to its bearer. Unlike the bone cleaver, raw and wild, this blade answers with both power and restraint, allowing only those deemed worthy to wield its strength.
She pauses, her expression growing darker, a hint of both reverence and warning in her voice.
It is said to echo the will of its master, and to draw power from the spirit it serves.
Her fingers hover just above the gem, her eyes lifting to meet yours.
This is Dusk's embrace,
she says, the name slipping from her lips like an invocation.
A sword of kings.
She steps back, her gaze fierce with excitement.
Dusk's embrace answers only to a sovereign, and with it,
she says softly,
you may find the true measure of your reign.
The Matriarch's eyes linger on you a moment longer, her gaze filled with something unreadable, part reverence, part longing. With a soft, almost reluctant sigh, she steps back, her figure poised and regal.
Your throne awaits you, sovereign.
She croons, her voice softening as though bidding farewell to something sacred. With a graceful gesture, she turns, leading you through the hallways of the bathhouse. Shadows flicker across the ancient walls as you pass through the grand ballroom, where the courtesan's remnants lie scattered in solemn silence, their twisted forms still in reverence in the presence of the Matriarch. The faint scent of incense clings to the air, mingling with the distant echoes of laughter and music, like memories trapped in the very stones. As you approach the towering entrance doors, she pauses, her fingers grazing the intricate carvings. She turns to you one last time, her dark eyes filled with that same enigmatic blend of respect and something more.
You carry more than a crown. You carry the weight of a forgotten reign,
she says, each word a quiet benediction.
May Dusk's embrace serve you well, and may you find in the shadows what others fear to seek.
With a final, graceful bow, she opens the door, the weight of her gaze heavy as she watches you step out into the mist-laden streets of Zaal. The doorway slowly closes, her figure fades into the darkness, leaving you alone. Dusk's embrace warm in your hand, dreadhook heavy on your back, and the silence of the drowned city swells around you once more. As you traverse the labyrinthine passages of Zaal, the faint luminescence of fungi guides your steps across the damp stones. The city's silent corridors feel less foreboding now, each echo of dripping water a reminder of both its ruin and its lingering life. A subtle weight in your pocket catches your attention. Reaching in, your fingers close around a cool, engraved coin. Pulling it out, you see its silver surface etched with intricate designs of intertwined serpents and fading royal insignias. You hadn't realized you'd taken it. Perhaps it was given to you just before the chaos within the Royal Bathhouse. Turning the coin over in your hand, you recall the Bellkeeper's request of a worthy offering. Now, this relic, steeped in the excesses of Zaal's nobility, might be just what he desires. Resolute, you set your course back toward the Watcher's belfry. You make your way to him. Navigating submerged streets, the city's melancholic beauty unfolds before you. Statues of long-forgotten deities stand sentinel over cracked plazas, their stone faces eroded but still conveying a silent wisdom. The mist that clings to Zaal seems to part before you, revealing hidden details. A mural here, a glyph there, that you hadn't noticed before. The ascent up the belfry's spiral staircase feels different this time. Each step echoes softly, the air thick with an intangible energy. Reaching the top, you find the Bellkeeper gazing out over the drowned city, his translucent form blending in with the dim light. He turns as you approach, his eyes reflecting a depth of ages.
"You've returned,"
he says, his voice barely more than a breath.
"Have you brought something for the trade?"
Wordlessly, you present the silver coin. The Bellkeeper's eyes fix on it, a flicker of recognition passing across his features.
"The Royal Gambler's coin,"
he murmurs.
"a token of fate's whimsy and the folly of those who sought to escape it."
He gestures towards the collection of enigmatic wares displayed on the rough-hewn table.
"Choose, then. Let this be the bridge between what was lost and what you seek."
As you gaze upon the Bellkeeper's array of mysterious artifacts, your eyes settle on the siren glass pendant. Its polished sea glass shimmers with an ethereal light. The ocean dances within its depths. The Bellkeeper notices your interest and nods slowly.
"Ah, the siren glass pendant,"
he intones, his voice echoing softly in the quiet tower.
"With this, you may peer into realms unseen, unveiling truths hidden from ordinary eyes. But be warned, the visions it grants are not without their burdens."
You reach out and lift the pendant gently from its place. The cool touch of sea glass sends a subtle thrill through your fingertips. Holding it close, you feel a faint resonance, a connection to the unseen energies that permeate Zaal. The Bellkeeper accepts the Royal Gambler's coin from your other hand, his translucent fingers closing over the engraved silver.
"A fair exchange,"
he remarks, a hint of melancholy in his tone.
"May the paths you walk lead you to the answers you seek, but tread carefully. Not all that is revealed should be pursued."
He steps back, his gaze returning to the mist-laden expanse of the drowned city below.
"Our dealings conclude here. But perhaps we shall cross paths again, should fate deem it so."
Turning away, you descend the spiral staircase of the belfry, the siren glass pendant now resting against your chest. The weight of it feels strange, a heft present that belies its size. As you navigate the submerged streets once more, you notice small changes in your surroundings. Hidden markings on the ancient walls, ruins and symbols that were invisible before. The city's silent tales begin to unfold around you. Statues you had passed earlier now bear expressions that hint at forgotten emotions. Murals revealed new details, faces emerging from worn paint, gestures that suggest stories of love, betrayal, and sorrow. The veil between the seen and the unseen has thinned, allowing you a deeper understanding of Zaal's tragic history. Navigating through a narrow alley, you come upon a passageway that wasn't apparent before. An archway emerges from between narrow walls, framed by crumbling stone intertwined with creeping vines bearing luminescent blossoms. Faint glyphs etched into the weathered masonry shimmer subtly, drawing the eye inward. A soft glow spills from beyond, hinting at hidden mysteries awaiting discovery. You recall the Bellkeeper's warning, mindful that not all revelations are benign. Approaching the tree, you sense a lingering sadness, a memory trapped within the forsaken place. The pendant grows warmer against your skin, and a soft melody reaches your ears, a lament carried across time. Closing your eyes, you allow the echoes of the past to wash over you, offering a silent tribute to the souls long departed. Now with renewed resolve, you step back into the winding streets, the siren glass pendant guiding you toward paths unexplored. The weight of unseen eyes follows you, but you press on, embracing the delicate balance between knowledge and caution. Emerging from the narrow alley, you step into a vast, desolate courtyard dominated by remnants of a colossal statue, its features eroded beyond recognition. The expanse stretches around you, illuminated by the soft luminescence of fungi clinging to ancient stonework. A metallic clang reverberates from across the courtyard, drawing your attention. Standing between crumbling pillars is a towering figure, nearly 7 feet tall, clad in corroded armor etched with the scars of countless battles. Chains coil around his massive frame, rattling softly with each deliberate step he takes toward you. His visage is obscured by a helm. This chainbound sentinel fixes his gaze upon you. And without warning, he swings a massive chain, the metal links slicing through the space with lethal accuracy. You scarcely evade the initial strike, the chain smashing into the ground where you stood moments before, sending shards of stone flying. The sentinel advances relentlessly, his chains whipping through the air in a deadly rhythm. Drawing the dread hook, you brace yourself. He swings again, and you deflect, metal clashing against metal in a shower of sparks. The force of the link's momentous passage against the dread hook makes it vibrate violently in your hands, but you hold firm. He draws the chain back and feints a strike to your left, now within a few feet of you. The chain whips the air next to you, and you only just notice as the sentinel swiftly brings the other chain down from the right. You react just in time, diving out of the way from the attack. Recovering swiftly and rising to your feet, you launch the dread hook, aiming for the gap in his armor. The hook catches his pauldron, but it fails to penetrate. An idea. You realize you can use the hook to pull him off balance. With a powerful yank, you attempt to unbalance him, but he's too stout, and he pulls you toward him instead. He raises a gauntleted fist and brings it down. You step back and yank down again, using his momentum against him. The ground cracks under the force of his impact. Seizing the moment, you dislodge and swing the dread hook overhead, mimicking the man you got it from. You target the chain wrapped around his arm. The dread hook smacks the armored forearm hard. The sharpened point worms between the chain links, causing the chain to loosen. The sentinel rises to his knee and responds with a backhanded swing, the weight of his armored limb catching you across the chest. You're thrown backward, abandoning the dread hook and sent tumbling across the rough stone. Pain flares, but you quickly force yourself to your feet, resolve now fueling your tenacity. He tries to remove the dread hook, but it's entangled in the chain. He opts to leave it as it is, and focuses his attack on the remaining chain as he advances. Reflexively drawing Bone Cleaver, you feel its power surge through you. As he closes the distance, you focus on his movements, seeking an opening. He rushes, the chain whirling toward you like a deadly comet. You sidestep, the links brushing past your shoulder with a metallic hiss. Seizing the moment, you slash at his armored flank with the Bone Cleaver, but the blade skitters off the corroded steel, leaving only a shallow gouge. Undeterred, the sentinel swings again, this time low and sweeping. The chain catches your ankle, yanking your feet out from under you. You crash onto the stone, the impact jolting through your spine. Gritting your teeth against the pain, you slice downward with the Bone Cleaver, severing the chain wrapped around your leg. Scrambling to your feet, you see him momentarily off guard as the dread hook dislodges, the chain securing his armor unraveling. The armor of his forearm clings heavily to the ground, exposing his arm. The sentinel's exposed limb reveals pale, waterlogged skin beneath the darkened, tarnished metal. Grasping the moment, you drive forward without hesitation. You bring the Bone Cleaver down on his arm, eliciting a metallic groan from the towering foe. He recoils, and he raises his bleeding arm in front of his eyes, studying it. After a moment, he reacts in a way that catches you off guard. A scream of terror erupts from within his helmet, followed by frantic infant-like cries that echo through the courtyard. He grips above the wound, attempting to staunch the bleeding. You watch in stunned confusion for a moment, realizing he's afraid of the injury, or of his own blood. Seeing an opportunity, you move around the fountain in the center of the courtyard, approaching the Chainbound Sentinel from his back to retrieve the dead hook from the ground where it lays. You deftly pick it up, and he remains unaware of you, instead focused on stopping the bleeding. With the dread hook in hand, you use it to snare the links around his leg, and with a rigorous tug, you snap the chain, and it unravels, pieces of armor clattering to the ground. He thrashes wildly, attempting to fend you off, but ultimately he remains too engrossed with his wound. Each piece of armor removed reveals more of his vulnerable, pitiful form. Despite his towering size, his cries continue to pierce the silence. Finally, the last of the chains fall away, and his steel shell drops heavily to the ground. The unbound sentinel now stands before you, a horrendously marred man with deep purple scars covering every inch of his body. He trembles as his wails subside. He too looks at his body. Raising his hands, he takes in the condition of his arms. His face is perplexed, as though he's forgotten that this was truly him. He looks down at the rest of his body, and his brow knits into concern, perhaps disgust. His face was not spared from whatever tortures he has endured, a landscape of scars and marred flesh. The unbound sentinel fixes his gaze on you, scrutinizing every inch. A sneer flashes across his ravaged features, and a growl rumbles low in his throat. Without warning, he charges, bare feet slapping the wet ground like rolling thunder. Reacting swiftly, you draw the bone cleaver and begin your counterattack. His hand snaps up with startling speed, grasping the blade mid-strike. The edge slices into his palm, dark blood sprays the blade, yet he appears oblivious to the injury. He tightens his hold with a crushing grip, and the bone cleaver cracks under the immense pressure. He wrenches the weapon from your grip, and he smashes it on the ground. The bone cleaver shatters, fragments scattering across the slick stones. He now stands before you, blood dripping from his clenched fist, eyes blazing with rage and anguish. As he advances, you draw Dusk's embrace, feeling a surge of energy coursing through the blade. He charges again, and you ready yourself to meet his onslaught. He thrashes, each swing a tidal force. His very rage fuels the weight behind each strike. His fists carve wild waves through the air, a raw violence in each blow barely controlled. You duck low, weaving through his strikes, the air splitting around his fists, heavy with the sound of his labored and ragged breaths. His next swing is close enough that you feel the gust of displaced air, a monsoon of anger grazing you. You dart to his side, and Dusk's embrace finds its mark, slicing across his chest in a swift line. The blade tip digs deep, splitting skin and muscle. Dark blood pools, slickening his chest, but he steps forward, ignoring the pain entirely. The wound may well have been a scratch in his mind, a mere hindrance in the single-minded path to destroy you. His bloodshot eyes meet yours, wild and unseeing. He lunges again, his bare, scarred arms flex as he reaches for you, muscles bulging with effort. You sidestep, bringing Dusk's embrace down onto his shoulder with force enough to splinter bone. His body shudders under the blow, a sharp exhale escaping his contorted lips as he staggers, his momentum faltering for a precious moment. Still, he charges forward, his fury escalating, each swing faster and more frantic, his attacks turning into a rainfall, a torrent. You read his movement and spot a slight overextension in his last wild swing. You pivot sharply, feinting left. He follows your misdirection, his weight shifting as he stumbles slightly, the anger clouding his vision just enough. In that suspended moment, you grip Dusk's embrace with both hands and drive the blade forward. The steel punctures just below his arm, vanishing between his ribs, and it emerges from his neck on the opposite side. His steps falter, a tremor running through his form. His body seems to realize the depth of the wound before his mind does. The flame in his eyes dim, replaced by the infantile fear of before. He meets your gaze, an unfathomable blend of anguish and fear twisting the grimace on his face. Breath heavy and ragged, he sinks to his knees, hands reaching for the tip of the blade protruding from his neck. Blood drips steadily from his mouth, staining his lips deep crimson as he stares up at you. His expression is one of unspoken questions, resentment, and a grim acceptance, all woven together. The strength escapes his limbs, tears welling in his eyes. The tears fall and trace the scars left from a history better off forgotten. With his final breath, a whistling whimper escapes his lips. Then he collapses onto the cold, unyielding stone. The impact reverberates across the courtyard, and the silence that follows is thick and final. You hardly feel victorious for the loss of such a violent yet broken life. After the unbound sentinel falls, silence blankets the courtyard, the weight of the encounter settling like dust over a forgotten relic. You move to collect the fragments of the bone cleaver, still humming with residual energy. Each shard glows faintly as you gather them, the edges sharp and dark as they drink in the feeble light. Leaving the broken courtyard behind, you step through a narrow, mist-shrouded valley. The air carries a bitter, medicinal taste. Ahead, you glimpse a sagging sign swinging over the street, its letters barely readable under the layers of rot. Plague Treatment Sector. The path slopes downward, drawing you into what once might have been a bustling district. The buildings press close, their windows gaping open, curtains hanging like wilted hands reaching out. Shards of glass crunch beneath your feet, scattered among broken vials and syringes. Each one holds traces of dark, stagnant fluid, a frail testament to the desperate attempts at curing the slum sickness. A faded stone slab embedded in the wall catches your eye, its carved words barely legible through the grime. It warns of a vicious fever that warped both flesh and mind, instructing all infected to report immediately. Around it, faded symbols are scrawled in uneven lines, buried beneath layers of mold. The walls tell stories in these scars, of hurried protection and of a sickness that overtook all hopes of escape. As you move further in, figures emerge from the shadows, their eyes tracking your every step. They drift from darkened doorways, standing silently in broken windows or stepping carefully out of narrow alleys. They appear to be the doctors of Zaal's old medical quarters, now full of plague. They carry rusted tools and impotent cures, clinging to relics of their forgotten trade with hands trembling from decay. Some clutch bundles of herbs blackened with rot. Others hold syringes filled with viscous fluids, or bone saws rusted to the hilt. One healer, his mouth almost stitched entirely shut with black thread, reaches toward you, his fingers pressing an empty vial into your hand, as if it holds salvation. His eyes are fever bright, as if he stares through you, murmuring in cracked, broken whispers, "This will ease the pain, the cure. You must be saved. This will ease the pain, the cure. You must be saved, the cure. You must be saved." Another figure presses closer, holding out a strained cloth in reverence, whispering, "We'll make you whole. We'll 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 make you whole." The words slip from him like a final request. Each of them seems drawn by a compulsion, their hands hovering near your skin, afraid to lose what might be their final patient. As you press onward, you find an altar built from the splintered wood and cracked stone, cluttered with remnants of their healing trade. Tools, glass shards, torn linen, and withered herbs are placed with ritualistic care, as if this pile of scraps could offer salvation. Scrawled notes litter the base, ink-stained paper faded with time. The fever spreads beyond our reach, purge the body, cleanse the soul. One journal page stands out among the rest, its ink hastily scratched onto yellowing parchment. To the healers who come after, the fever spreads without sense or mercy. Our potions grow weak, our prayers unheard. We have tried to purge it, but the body resists, twists, becomes something other. Be weary, The fevered are no longer ours to save. The note reads like a grim warning, a testament to those who witnessed the fever's corruption firsthand. As you let it fall, the figures around the altar draw closer, their murmurings grow louder, voices overlapping in a hushed chant. Saved. 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 Then the murmur dies down. The healers quickly retreat to the edges of the street, eyes drifting as they press their backs against walls, their faces taut with fear deeper than death. Doors lock, blinds draw shut, those without limbs or unable to move quickly are dragged away, while others are left to loll about in the street. From further down the fog-choked alley comes the sound of labored, guttural breathing. A hulking form takes shape in the mist, dragging one heavy foot in front of the other. The creature's spine juts out from beneath crusted and flamed skin, creating a ridge of bone that twists grotesquely with each step. In one oversized hand, he clutches a rusted saw, its teeth dark and wretched. Thick, the healers murmur. And beside him slinks another figure, moving with unsettling fluidity, limbs elongated, contorted into strange angles. Her hands are lengthened into claws that scrape along the walls. She crawls along the stone, neck craning at a painful angle as she peers at you, her jaw locked in a grimace that suggests both pain and hunger. Thin, it's thin. Look, it's thin. Thin, they whisper. Thick's eyes glint with a feral hunger, while Thin's elongated fingers twitch with manic intent. The other healers fall silent, retreating into the shadows, leaving you alone with these two mutated monstrosities, their eyes fixed on you as they step forward, closer and closer still. Thick makes the first move, his massive form quaking with each lumbering step. He lifts the rusted saw, its jagged teeth catching what little light filters through the mist. His movements are heavy, as though he's forgotten his own weight, dragging limbs overgrown with crude muscle. His spine shakes disgustingly, vertebrae protruding in unnatural ridges beneath stretched and scarred skin, and with a snarl he swings the saw down toward you. You step to the side, the blade cleaving into an unlucky healer that was at your feet moments before, sending viscera scattering in all directions. Thick's breath rattles, his eyes narrowing as he yanks the saw from the stone and bone. He lifts it again, readying another strike, his overgrown arm trembling with the effort. It's clear that he's lost any finesse, led purely by brute strength and hunger. From above, Thin slithers along the wall, her limbs bending at unnatural angles, giving her an insect-like appearance as she clambers closer. Her elongated fingers, and tipped with broken, sharpened nails, scrape against the stone, creating a high-pitched grating noise that resonates down the alley. Her mouth opens into a twisted smile, rows of yellowed and decayed teeth bared as she drops from the wall, landing on all fours like a predator preparing to strike. Thick swings his saw again, but this time you duck low, rolling to the side as the massive blade swings overhead, slicing the air with a deadly force. As you rise, Thin darts in, her clawed hands aiming at your stomach. You twist away, catching a glimpse of her eyes, void of humanity, only the fevered shreds of her twisted existence left. Drawing Dusk's embrace, you step back, keeping both of them in your line of sight. Thick's labored breath and Thin's chittering grow louder, closing in like jaws of a trap. Thick moves with slow, thudding steps, while Thin circles you in rapid bursts, scuttling from side to side. Seizing an opportunity, you rush toward Thick, slashing Dusk's embrace across his chest. The blade digs into his swollen flesh, and dark, oily blood bursts from the wound. But Thick only grunts, eyes focusing as he raises his free hand to swat you away. You step back, narrowly avoiding his grasp, but Thin darts in from the side, her claws raking across your arm in a flash of searing pain. You stagger to the side, feeling the sting as Thin's twisted smile widens, reveling in the damage she's inflicted. Thick roars, a choked sound, his saw swinging wide as he stumbles forward. You block, barely managing to twist out of the way, guiding the massive blade past you, a shower of sparks lighting up the street. Unintentionally, You drove the sword into a soggy wooden door and lodged it within. With a quick motion, you set and plunged Dusk's embrace into the overgrown forearm. The steel buries deep, weaving through sinew and bone, and Thick howls in pain, jerking back and leaving a trail of dark blood spattered across the stones. Thin circles again, scuttling closer, unsettling. She pauses, crouched low, her drawn-out fingers clicking against the ground as she sizes you up, her eyes reflecting a feverish eagerness. With a hiss, she charges, her arms stretching forward as if every bone were bending to give her a reach. You twist just in time, slashing upward with Dusk's embrace, the blade catching her just under the chin. And Thin lets out a pitched yowl, stumbling back as violet blood sprays from the wound. But even wounded, they're relentless. Thick pulls his saw free and swings again as blood drips steadily from his wounds. Thin, too, doesn't relent. Her fracturing limbs bend and stretch with renewed fury, her mouth pulled into a bloodied grin. As they close in, you're reminded of the gorge-bound husks from the Bleakstone Gorge. They are just mindless beasts in the skin of people. Thick bounds forward, his massive frame swaying side to side, saw raised high. You jump out of the way, Dusk's embrace carving a deep line across his thigh as he passes, yet he barely registers the wound. His bloodshot eyes stay fixed on you, locked in a grotesque mix of anger and hunger, his labored breaths rattling like stones caught in a rusty mill. The gash on his thigh oozes dark blood, thick and slow, but he presses forward, every step a relentless thud against the cracked stone. Behind him, Thin circles quickly, her long fingers twitching, nails scraping as she scampers across the ground, joints popping as she maneuvers with unnatural contortions. She smirks. And then with a sudden burst, she launches forward, claws aimed for your face. You drop backwards, bringing Dusk's embrace upward in a swift arc, and the blade catches Thin's arm mid-lunge, slicing through the skin and muscle. She screeches, a high, piercing wail, but the pain only seems to fuel her frenzy. She skitters back, violet blood seeping from her wounds. Her eyes are wild, fervent, as though the pain is a reminder of something she's almost forgotten. Thick, undeterred by the deepening wounds across his body, drags his saw across the stone floor, the rusty teeth scraping against the ground with a sickening screech. With a sudden roar, he swings again, but his strength is flagging, each movement slower and more rough. You dodge, circling to his uninjured side, and you thrust Dusk's embrace into his exposed shoulder. The impact drives Thick back a step, his arm going limp, the saw slipping from his fingers and clattering to the ground. For a moment he stares at his empty hand as if confused, as though the realization of his own limitations is dawning. But before he can react, Thin darts in from behind, claws aimed at your side. You twist, blocking her attack with a sharp kick that sends her reeling, but her grip is relentless, nails scraping along your arm, leaving shallow, burning trails. Thin's eyes gleam with manic light, and she lets out a rattling breath, her body twitching with excitement. Despite her wound, she advances, circling with the predator's patience, while Thick, crippled, staggers forward, reaching for you with his one good hand, fingers curling into a hulking claw. You take a steadying breath, gripping Dusk's embrace tightly, feeling the weight of each bruise, each scrape. Every nerve is alive, honed by the desperation of survival. You need to do more. You sheath Dusk's embrace and reach for the dreadhook, needing its length to finish this. Thick lunges again, his empty hand clawing through the air. You easily evade the advance, catching his wrist in the hook and twisting sharply. The bones crack under your parry, and he lets out a frothing scream, staggering to his knees as his broken arm dangles uselessly. As Thick's colossal form slumps forward, Thin's eyes glint with feral intensity. Her limbs tense, claws scraping against the ground as she watches the stumbling giant. Then in a heartbeat, she springs. Thin lands on Thick's back, her long fingers digging deep, nails splitting skin with ease. Thick bellows, staggering, but Thin's grip is relentless. Her body snaps and contorts as she clambers over Thick's broad shoulders, clawing and rending. A ragged screech escapes her throat, more animal than human, a raw, piercing sound that drowns out Thick's struggling grunts. Thick swings his massive arms in an attempt to swat Thin away, but Thin twists, dodging with a spasm of unnatural speed, clinging tighter. Her claws rake down Thick's neck, carving fresh gashes that spill dark blood in uneven streams. Thin's mouth curls back, teeth bared in a twisted snarl as she leans close, fingers gouging into the thick muscle of Thick's shoulders. She digs deeper, clawing through the sinew and tissue as if peeling open an overripe fruit. Her own breath hitching with some primal satisfaction. Thick stumbles, his legs finally buckling, and as he sinks to the ground, Thin lets loose a final unhinged scream. She drives her claws into Thick's spine, twisting, her whole body shaking with a frenzy that's been buried for far too long. Thick collapses fully, his hulking body hitting the ground in a lifeless, blood-soaked heap. Thin stands over the corpse, breathing raggedly, her gaunt figure trembling as blood and viscera drip from her fingers. Her eyes wide and unblinking, gleam with a twisted glare. She stares down at the ruin she's made of Thick, her face slackening, and for an instant, a strange flicker crosses her features. A flash of something almost human. Relief. Vindication. Her gaze shifts, slowly rising to meet yours. The manic fire in her eyes dulls, replaced by a shade of calm. As if some buried part of her has finally surfaced. Her bloodied lips twitch, just slightly, a ghost of a smile touching her face. The madness isn't gone, but for a breath, something clearer shines through. Something that remembers. She looks back down at Thick's corpse, squatting near his head. She slowly begins the revolting process of stripping the flesh off of his neck. Then she grabs his head with both hands, forcefully twisting, and rips Thick's head off. She grabs his head by the hair and stares into his dead face for a long while. And then she screams, and it's unlike any other noise she's made. A sound of hatred, of anger, and betrayal. And then she throws his head to the ground, her arm acting like a whip. Thick's head explodes in a wet shower of skull and brain matter at her feet. Thin peers over her shoulder at you one last time, and then she leaps to a nearby wall and vanishes over the roof. With Thin gone, an eerie silence settles over the courtyard once again, broken only by the drip of blood pooling around Thick's lifeless body. You approach cautiously, eyes scanning his massive twisted form. The brutal end he met feels almost fitting after witnessing the raw hatred Thin unleashed on him, but the unsettling action hints at secrets this monstrous figure may still be hiding. You kneel beside his corpse, carefully prying open his blood-soaked coat. The fabric, once white but now stained beyond recognition, splits open to reveal a battered leather journal tucked against his chest, wedged beneath the remains of his overgrown flesh. The binding is rough, poorly stitched together as if it had been torn and reassembled countless times. Blood has soaked the cover, leaving its surface warped and peeling. Opening the first page, you learn Thick's real name, Dr. Garrus Meverick. You leaf through the journal with growing dread, each page revealing an escalating parade of horrors. Thick's obsession stretched across dozens of nameless patients, each identified only by numbers scrawled at the tops of every page. The entries chronicle a catalog of unhinged ambition and sadistic curiosity. There's patient 27, described as strong, resistant to initial serum. Subjected to compound injections that bloated his limbs and crushed his bones, leaving him twisted and immobile in the final days. Then there was patient 15, whose transfusion experiments, intended to create immunity, left her blood thick and clotted, the skin peeling from her bones as the chemicals wreaked havoc on her body. Page after page recounts forced surgeries and reckless injections, his detached words barely concealing his underlying fury at their failures. Thick's handwriting grows more frantic as he describes each agonizing attempt to create resilience, the scrawl on the page reflecting his deteriorating mind. His patients are tortured by hunger, isolation, repeated lacerations, all to test limits, he writes coldly, to document thresholds. The experimentations become a form of ritual punishment, any trace of compassion eroded in the bile of his obsession. One particular entry causes your hands to tighten on the journal. Patient 63, it reads. The ink darker here, as if Thick had pressed harder in a fit of emotion. The details of patient 63's early life are meticulous, intimate. She had been his wife, a woman named Mara. She was a skilled healer in her own right. She had originally worked alongside him, caring for the sick and the weak, united in their devotion to combat the fever that plagued Zaal. But somewhere along the line, something darkened within Thick, and his twisted desire to perfect humanity turned her from partner to unwilling subject. She resisted, and he recorded it. Patient is defiant, not responding to treatment protocol, he wrote. His detached tone masking a vile betrayal. His words grow repulsed as he describes her transformation under his hand. Repeated injections that distorted her body, surgeries conducted without anesthesia, shackled to tables as her mind begged to break under the endless assault. The descriptions turned darker, bloodier, more personal. Patient's resistance persists. The need for disciplinary measures has arisen. His words are chillingly clinical, yet the lines between science and cruelty dissolve. She was not just a subject to him, she was his possession, a life he twisted and molded to satisfy both his scientific ego and something far more sinister. Her refusals were met with corrective actions, a euphemism that conceals horrific abuse, each instance of which is marked with a chilling detachment, Patient's spirit tested. No effect on immunity observed. Yet, as if his experiments weren't enough, his debasement extended to defilement. His notes became almost manic, the language deteriorating into a vile confession of acts that go beyond science into something unmentionable. He describes her pleading, her degradation, the way he forced her to endure, cataloging her suffering with a twisted fascination. Her torment stripped of all humanity. Toward the end of the entries about Mara, his tone grows resentful, almost bitter. She refused to break, in spirit at least, her eyes holding a defiant glimmer that Dr. Garrus Meverick found maddening. She is stubborn, immune to degradation, he writes, as though disgusted by her enduring will. His final entry on her is scrawled and almost illegible, an unhinged rant accusing her of weakness yet also of resilience, his hatred mingling with the twisted admiration. She refused to submit even now, yet no matter what she will serve her purpose. The last words about her are simple, clinical. Patient deceased, he writes. No further explanation, no remorse. And then he starts in on patient 64 on the very same day. Turning away from the twisted journal, a faint scuffling drags your attention upward. In the shadows they gather, the patients of Plague Row, gaunt and dead-eyed, their stares fixed on the corpse of Dr. Garrus Meverick with a hunger that's neither human nor entirely sane. Skeletal fingers twitch in anticipation, curling and uncurling, their movements as jerky as the spasms of dying nerves. The first one lunges, grimy nails tearing into flesh. A grotesque frenzy erupts as the others swarm in. clawing and tearing with the precision of starved animals, their hands disappearing beneath folds of sinew and blood, their lips peeled back, revealing teeth like shattered ivory as they rip into Dr. Maverick's corpse, rending it apart with a blind, fervent zeal of a ritual gone horribly wrong. Blood spatters the stones, dark and viscous, sinking into the cracks like ink spilling across a dried page. Some of them gnaw through the muscle, snapping brittle bones with muffled crunches, while others bury their faces deep, scooping handfuls of tissue as though each scrap is the last they'll ever taste. Their mouths work feverishly, each swallow a slick, wet sound that mingles with the soft rustle of ragged clothing and the faint drip of unseen leaks overhead. The air thickens, damp and sour, weighed down by the stench of rotten metallic tang that seeps from the body's mess and coats the lungs like breathing through layers of cloth soaked in urine. A hollow rhythmic suck arises as they devour, muffling the sound of your own breaths as the patients eat with a fervor that suggests something more than just hunger. When nothing but splintered bones and marrow-streaked rags remain, a few of them gather what's left, a mangled hand, a section of rib cage, and haul the remnants to a rusted sewer grate. They jam the pieces through the bars with brute force, the remains swallowed by the dark, sludge-filled waters below, carried away by the slow, languid current of the ancient sewer. Blood-smeared and panting, they step back, each patient straightening as though satisfied by the grisly ritual. Some lick the gore from their fingers, others simply vanish into the mist, leaving only the stains of their feast on stone. The corpse-laden street ahead twists like a tangled vein, winding through sagging ruins and looming stone walls. Each step lands with a soft, wet squelch as stagnant puddles mirror faint slivers of torchlight. The cobblestones here are irregular, jagged, pressing against the bottom of your feet with a silent resistance as though urging you to turn back. Shadows bleed from the narrow gaps between buildings, their shapes merging with fog so dense it clings like damp fingers reaching up from the ground. Every surface bears the mark of neglect and age, dark stains seeping down the walls as though the very stones themselves bleed. Faint cracks splinter across doorways and windows, growing wider as the buildings rise above you, twisting and leaning in as if hunched over by some terrible beast. A chill pervades the air, creeping under skin and sinking straight into bone, more than a temperature, an instinct. You press forward, each footstep seems to echo back from the damp walls, only to be swallowed by the oppressive quiet once more. The silence here is thick, alive with a heaviness that suffocates sound, save for the faintest murmur of voices on the air, a string of fractured, broken words drifting past like ghostly relics of forgotten speech. The further you go, the deeper the mist curls, winding up around your legs, an incessant, unseen presence that clutches and clings with a wet, suffocating grasp. The alley closes in, narrowing around you like a trap as the mist thickens. You move through cramped archways, ducking under sagging beams, past windows with broken shards of glass catching the light in cruel angles. The shapes inside sway in the murk, vague, ephemeral, like reeds submerged in the water. Each step deeper into Plague Row feels like descending into the bowels of a beast, its damp breath brushing against your skin. Somewhere in the distance, a faint skitter echoes and vanishing before you can turn to see. Only the rhythmic drip remains, a sound slow and deliberate, slipping into the cadence of your heartbeat. Dark stains stretch along the walls and trails too fresh to ignore, leading towards heaps of abandoned cloth that slump against the buildings, each one twisted and some bloated as though they once held form, human or otherwise. Ahead, through the parting mist, you glimpse a shape of a structure, apart from the surrounding ruin. Sinking partially into the ground, its windows stand tall and narrow, their glass smeared and cracked, barely containing the decay that consumes the rest. The building's roof arches upward toward the fog, shedding shingles like dead leaves, as if clinging to some last remnant of grandeur. A single archway stands before you, framing a door worn and blackened by age, its wood warped and fossilized. Your hand brushes over its surface, rough and splintered, as you push it open. A hollow creak echoes through the silence, breaking the stillness before something stirs within, barely heard. You step inside, torchlight casting erratic shadows that recoil from the light. The darkness here not merely an absence, but a presence, ancient and insidious, filling every corner. Rows of stone shelves stretch ahead, their bases partially submerged in stagnant water. Bloated and unreadable, books and scrolls sag under the weight of years spent in damp neglect, their words blurring into the encroaching rot. The water laps gently at the crumbling walls, and the shelves lean precariously, bearing the burden of forgotten narratives sinking into the muck below. In this forsaken realm, time is thickened into a suffocating haze, laden with ghosts of memories that cling to every ruined page and shadowed alcove. You venture deeper into the murky gloom of the sunken library, and an unsettling excitement hangs in the air. The uncomfortable silence is abruptly shattered by a faint scrabbling sound, a rustling reminiscent of parchment brushing against stone. Emerging from the depths of darkness, figures wade into view, their forms defying sense. Tall and elongated, they glide through the room, wrapped in tattered robes that flutter like wraiths of smoke. Their limbs stretch unnaturally, joints bending at impossible angles, creating an uncanny, fluid motion. Beneath their thin, parchment-like skin, bone protrusions ripple and shift as if their bodies are constantly reshaping. Atop their bodies, books take the place of heads, each one a different tome turned in various orientations. Their pages bear hollow voids and deep, inky pits that seem to swallow the light, rendering their stories indistinguishable. Strangely, you don't feel threatened. The air thickens with tension as you take a cautious step closer, drawn in by their ashen demeanor. Their skeletal hands extend, fingers ending in sharp, black nails that glisten with an oily sheen. Thin streams of viscous black ink flow from their cracked skin, pooling into glyphs and symbols. Each movement leaves a trail of ink, forming letters that hang briefly in the air before dissolving into the ether. One of the figures catches your attention, a lanky creature with a book that resembles a human head. It glides towards you, curiosity reflecting in its void-like gaze. Stopping at a respectful distance, it observes you for a moment longer, and then it lifts a skeletal hand, writing in the air with pitch-black ink that wells from its fingertips. H-E-L-L-O. It inscribes, the letters shimmering briefly before fading into the void. It raises an open palm, offering a ghostly wave of acknowledgement. Unsure of how to respond, you tentatively wave back. The creature tilts its head and then resumes its writing. Questions and answers. We are Archivist. We are safe. Neutral. Each word drips from the air and sinks into the inky waters below. We trade knowledge. Bring us pages. We will write for you. The Archivist watch you with an intensity that feels almost palpable. As their ink flows and shifts, forming words that drape like mist in the air, you are reminded of the journal you found, the very document that details the horrors of Dr. Garrus Maverick's experiments. With a sense of purpose, you reach into your pack and pull out the journal, its pages worn and stained from the grisly contents within. You hold it out toward the nearest Archivist. The Archivists hover in the murky air, their dark forms pulsating with an eerie energy. As you present the journal, they tilt slightly, as if assessing your intentions. The Archivists then lean closer, and the ink flows from their fingertips, forming new letters that dance before your eyes. We accept, one writes, the words sharp and clear. Pages of science, pain, failure, new. They grasp the journal, and you feel a strange energy radiating through the air, a connection forged between your offering and their hunger for understanding. We will trade, another Archivist continues, the ink swirling with fervor. What do you seek? The past? The future. A gleam runs through the nearest Archivist. It lifts a skeletal hand, tracing a shape in the air with its black ink, forming a spiral that expands and contracts. Then the ink shifts, swirling around to the others. They respond in unison, their movements synchronizing in a graceful yet unsettling dance as their words are added to the growing spiral swirling around the sunken library. Books begin to fall from the shelves, but they do not fall in the water. They are suspended in the ink, their words bleeding from their pages. Past unfurling, one writes, letters drifting like shadows. Zaal fell, secrets buried. The words linger briefly. The human-headed Archivist draws closer, their form covered in inky blackness. They gesture with their ink-stained hands, beckoning you to follow, guiding you deeper into the ink storm. The ink rages around you, drawing you into the heart of their knowledge. And suddenly, reality shifts, and you find yourself immersed in the tragic history of Zaal, each moment unfolding right before your very eyes. In the flaming light of an opulent chamber, the city's pale-faced nobles congregate, their expressions illuminated by the warm radiance of torches. They whisper among themselves, the air thick with ambition and treachery. At the center of the gathering lies an ornate tome, its pages yellowed with age and inscribed with arcane knowledge. A figure draped in luxurious silks leans over the book, eyes alight with a fervent intensity. With this, we can harness the power beyond our wildest dreams. The voice resonates, seductive and inviting, drawing all eyes toward the forbidden text. The scene darkens, shifting to a dimly lit hall where the nobles now stand in a tight circle, hands raised towards a crimson sigil sprawled across the cold stone floor. The atmosphere hums with their incantations, voices intertwining in a cacophony of fervor and dread. At the heart of the ritual, a hapless victim lies bound and blindfolded, trembling with fear. As the chanting crescendos, the air ripples, revealing a rift that quivers with an otherworldly energy, beckoning to something sinister lying just beyond the veil. From the depths of the rift, an amorphous mass begins to emerge, a grotesque entity exuding an uncomfortable familiarity. The atmosphere thickens with dread as it unfolds, dark tentacles extending outward like grasping fingers. The nobles' expressions shift from delight to horror, their greedy smiles eroding into masks of panic as they realize the enormity of their folly. "What have we unleashed?" one cries, a voice laced with terror. But the response comes too late. Tendrils envelop them, drawing them into the abyss, their anguished screams swallowed by the encroaching darkness. The vision shifts again, revealing a once vibrant street of Zaal, now cloaked in shadows. Laughter and vitality are replaced by chaos as this great devourer feasts upon the city's essence. Buildings that once stood proud begin to warp and decay, their structures sagging under the weight of encroaching ruin. You can almost sense the heartbeat of the city quickening, its citizens fleeing in terror from the dark tide rising in the distance. The corruption spreads like wildfire, twisting the populace into grotesque caricatures of humanity. Faces once brimming with pride now wear a mask of horror, bodies contorting into a ghastly parody. A figure, a former noble, stumbles through the streets, despair etched on his features. "We thought we could conquer death," he howls, the madness consuming him. "But we are the cursed." His voice resonates, echoing in the desolation enveloping the city. Suddenly the waters surge higher, crashing against the crumbling edifices, as if the very city were retaliating against its inhabitants. You hear the discordance of panic, a haunting symphony of tragic loss as Zaal succumbs to its own excesses. The great devourer looms above, a silent witness to the devastation, its form merging with the shadows. With every desperate cry for help, the city sinks deeper into the abyss, drowning in the consequences of its hubris. As the storm of images begins to fade, the echoes of Zaal's tragic past linger heavily in the air. The Archivist, now a mere silhouette against the remnants of the unfolding chaos, gaze at you with their void-like eyes. Knowledge carries weight, they write, their words trailing off like shadows in the dim light. Everything around you fades to black. Waking up from the swirling tempest of visions, you find yourself lying on a bed of books, their covers cracked and pages yellowed with age. The musty scent of old parchment fills your nose, uniting with the lingering visions of the Archivist memories. The library is silent now, its once active shadows having settled into silence. Your heart races as you push yourself upright, surrounded by the remnants of knowledge. You rise, stretching your stiff limbs, and glance around the library. The Archivists are nowhere to be seen, their inked messages no longer lingering in the air. As you stand, the waterlogged floor creaks beneath your feet, sending ripples across the muddy puddles. The stone walls loom around you, heavy with the burden of this history. You take a moment to steady your breath, trying to shake off the remnants of the storm. Leaving the hushed sanctuary of the library, you emerge to the sights and sounds of Plague Row, greeting you once more. The air is heavy with the scent of rot, the remnants of the feast you witnessed still fresh in your mind. The plagued healers shuffle through the alleyways, their vain eyes glinting with feral yearning. The once lively streets lie in ruin, filled only with the unsettling sounds of shifting stone and distant, anguished cries. The city's decay is more unnerving now that you've seen the former glory. You tread carefully, navigating these treacherous streets. The nobles' reckless ambitions carved scars into this city. Their legacy of ruin must not be left unchecked. After what feels like an eternity of navigating the decay, the narrow alleyways give way to a wider thoroughfare, where the distant sound of water lapping against stone grows louder. Lanterns hang on the end of piers in the distance, beckoning you forward. As you approach the pier, a slow, relentless pulse radiates from the scar on your shoulder, a dull throb that intensifies with every step. The skin feels as though it pulls, the pain threading through muscle and bone as though the wound itself recognizes something. Your feet touch the worn boards of the pier, and a shadowy figure comes into focus at the far end, seated and motionless. You approach slowly, the pain of your scar intensifying. The figure's form sharpens in the lantern's light, and recognition strikes you. You know him. The man in white awaits. Your hand finds the dreadhook's handle, and you draw it. The weight of the weapon seems to urge you on, as if excited to see an old friend. Its edge glints faintly in the lantern light as you near, and the faint mist swirling at the pier's end sharpens your focus until only he remains. You cross the last few paces, standing just behind him. Without a word, you press the point of the dreadhook to his throat. There's momentary silence, thicker than the fog, heavier than the tension between you two, and then with an almost imperceptible tilt of his head, he acknowledges your presence, yet he doesn't turn. His gaze remains fixed on the expanse of dark water stretching endlessly ahead. And this moment feels weighted, saturated with something beyond words, and you step to his side, slowly circling until you face him. His mask hides any expression, but as you take in the scene, shock courses through you. The injury you once bore has manifested itself on him, no doubt through the power of the bone cleaver. The same jagged lines of blackened flesh now tear across his chest, but in an open, red wound. It stains his white garment dark, the slow trickle of blood pooling around him in a lingering allude to the injury he inflicted upon you. You stand there, the sight nodding your thoughts, as he finally raises his gaze to meet yours. He says nothing. Instead, he shifts his attention to something just beyond you. A boat, its shape barely visible through the mist, docked a short way off, yet just beyond his reach. You study his face, or what you can of it behind the mask, and in his gaze, you recognize the quiet resignation of a man nearing death. No words pass between you two, but the message is unmistakable. He looks once more towards his boat, its shape barely visible through the thickening mist, and without another thought, you lower the dread hook from his throat. With a deft motion, you swing the hook toward the boat and snag its edge, pulling it closer through the lapping water. The vessel glides in, skimming over the dark surface until it comes within an arm's reach of the pier. The man in white watches, the faintest shift in his posture suggesting acknowledgement. A subtle nod, or perhaps a small concession. One last silent pact. He braces himself, his movements strained, and he rises from his refuge. Blood pools where he'd been, a lasting stain left as a witness. He takes a step forward, the motion laden with the slow surrender of a body too worn to resist. You watch as he steps unsteadily into the boat, looking somehow more whole now than he ever had before. He steadies the boat beneath his feet, and then turns to face you. His masked gaze meets yours, steady and unfaltering, softened now with the faintest hint of gratitude. With a slow, steady motion, he raises his uninjured arm to his face and slips his mask free. Beneath it, his skin is marked, etched with runes like yours, each one carved deeply, trailing down his face and glowing faintly in the lantern's light. He traces the edges of the mask one last time, his thumb brushing over its worn surface. And then with a final, almost reverent gesture, he tosses it back to you. The mask lands on the pier, coming to a stop at your feet. He regards you once more, and then offers a subtle raise of 2 fingers. A silent, parting thanks. You nod, feeling the weight of his farewell, and then turns back to face the open water. With a final, almost reverent tilt of his head, he pitches forward, falling heavily against the deck of his boat. His life quietly fades, leaving nothing but the empty mask at your feet and the faint lapping of water beneath him. The boat drifts forward, carrying him slowly into the dense fog upon the waters of Zaal, until even the lantern's glow fades into the dark. A flame extinguished in the encroaching mists of Zaal. The air around you seems empty now, hallowed by the remnants of whatever passed between you and the man in white. Each step away echoes faintly against the waterlogged planks, the sound swallowed quickly by the fog settling back around you. You glance back once towards the pier's end, half expecting to see his form there, or perhaps his boat. But there's nothing, only the endless roll of fog across the water. Your thumb brushes across the mask's inner surface, and you pause, noticing a single word carved carefully within the smooth edge. The letters are rough, as if hastily inscribed, but they hold an unspoken truth. The Ferryman. It was the name he never spoke aloud. You secure the mask to your waist and return to the fetid city. Crossing back into Zaal streets, the faint sound of the city seems subtly warped, as though you've returned to a place you no longer recognize. The glow of bioluminescent fungi that cling to the walls appeared dimmer, casting an unfamiliar pall over the stones. You reach an old archway carved into the crumbling stone, and as you pass beneath it, a soft, unsettling awareness crawls along your skin. The remnants of Zaal's grand architecture shift around you, transforming gradually into structures of simpler design, their ornamentation melting away. The outer reaches of Zaal begin to surround you as you fully depart from the moldering slums. You pass through a time-worn iron arch, its surface freckled with rust and riddled with crumbling pits, and you notice the air shift, becoming more humid with each step. The thick, overgrown path beyond seems to absorb the city sounds behind you, and the subtle dampness in the air carries a strange, almost bitter scent. The stone beneath your feet gives way to patches of packed earth, dotted with skeletal plants that claw out from the soil. There's a subtle change in the silence, a presence that feels both distant and near. The shadows deepen, their forms almost taking shape among the twisted undergrowth. The narrow alleys here widen into disjointed fields of pale vegetation that seem both alive and forsaken, draped in a gray mist that barely lets light through. And before you realize it, you stepped into the outer gardens, a place where even Zaal's persistent decay feels abandoned. Thin, brittle branches curl upward, reaching from stunted, shriveled stalks, some topped with petals that appear more like torn flesh than flora. The garden unfolds around you, a strange and sprawling labyrinth of half-buried statues, scattered relics, and tangled roots emerging from the damp soil. You press onward, noting the faint outline of carefully spaced mounds rising from the ground in unnatural rows. Pale clusters of flowers, waxy and colorless, sprout haphazardly, catching only faint light in their folds. The stillness here feels nearly tangible, more of a presence than an absence, as if the forgotten grounds have been waiting. And so you step forward, carrying yourself further into the strange, unyielding quiet of Zaal's corpse garden. The path ahead is discordant, narrowing and writhing like the spine of Dr. Garrus Meverick, guiding you deeper into the bowels of the corpse garden. Each step you take feels like surrendering further to the damp, claustrophobic air, which clings thick as cobwebs, permeated with the stench of rusted blood and decayed flora. The soil beneath your feet gives way softly, almost as though it remembers life. A ground that shifts like dying flesh, unyielding but clinging, unwilling to let go. Ahead, shadows bleed from twisted roots of ancient trees, massive trunks rising from the soil like the rotten, broken limbs of giants. They arch overhead, bending under the weight of years, each root sprawling outward to entangle with others in a lattice work of slimy grasps that feel more sentient than any woodland ever should. The branches reach out as if searching for something lost, or perhaps beckoning something to stay. The air reeks with a damp rot that's nearly tactile, cloying on the tongue, coating your throat with the taste of mildew and wet earth. It settles deep in your lungs like the scent of something long dead. Shadows slink beneath the trees, and the faint remnants of a low, quivering resonance vibrate through the ground. Ahead, pale growths cling to the ground, blotches of sickly white against the dull black of soil. These are no ordinary plants, but coiled, distorted blooms that spread out like festering lesions, their leaves streaked with yellowed veins that curl downward in frail, wasted spirals. Their thin stems tremble slightly, sensitive to the brush of your passing like raw nerves, and their blighted petals droop, bruised and darkened, as though sapped of life by the very air they breathe. And then comes a sound, a wet rumbling, slithering through the silence. It seeps up from the earth, traveling through the thick roots and winding around tree trunks, echoing off of the stone. Shadows slither along the underbrush, pooling into shapes that twist and unfold from the ground, and birth creatures half forged from darkness and bone. They unfurl in an eerie silence, long limbs extending as though stretching after a long burial. Their bodies are half bone, half flesh, with tendons pulled taut, so tight it seems that one wrong move might tear them apart. You hold your breath as one of them draws close, and for the briefest, most harrowing moment, you feel their collective gaze, a hollow stare, empty yet scorching as though from sockets far deeper than bone. Each movement they make is slow, almost hesitant, their bony claws scraping lightly against the earth in a rhythm just a shade too measured, too deliberate. They circle you, drawing in. Every fiber of your being screams to recoil, but you remain frozen, bound by some unseen thread, prey in a snare. The creatures inch forward, their movements languid yet relentless, and you feel the space is closing in, every escape route severed by their encroachment. Their nostrils twitch and their serrated muzzles scraping the air, pulling in your scent, a low hiss escaping their maw as they edge closer still. For a heartbeat, you glimpse something familiar. These are no mindless beasts. They are, in some twisted way, waiting. You slowly reach across your body, grabbing the handle of Dusk's embrace, but you then notice that the bone-wrapped bracelet is gleaming faintly, calling from the deep. The Bone Sovereign's crown, embedded like a brand upon your wrist, glows blood red, its twisted ruins coming alive with a light that pulls the air tight around you. A ripple passes through them, the creatures ahead of you, a tremor that seizes their jagged limbs and brings them to a halt. Slowly, with an almost painful hesitance, they bow, as if to a long-forgotten master. Their snarls fade, the guttural growls replaced by something like a whisper, a faint plea scratching at the silence. Each creature's eyeless stare fixes upon the bracelet, and in that moment, you sense an ancient force resonating from the crown, something far beyond yourself, a fragment of King Marrow's, the dread sovereign whose power transcends his death. Their eyeless sockets flicker faintly with the same red, haunted light, and they press in close, bodies shifting and twisting until they encircle you like shadows, silent yet watchful, as though you have become both their keeper and their captive. Taking a careful step forward, you find that they mirror your movement perfectly, their steps light and soundless. You cautiously move beyond them, and as they trail you, their empty faces turn towards you with a reverence that feels as ancient as it is unsettling. Your path winds, narrowing until the twisted trunks and gnarled roots of ancient trees crowd in close, their bark split and scarred, weeping dark sap that glistens in the weak light like coagulated blood. There is an expectancy in the air, as though the garden itself was aware of your trespass, and each manipulated root, each disfigured tree is waiting. The ground beneath you shifts subtly, wetter with each step, until it feels as though the soil itself might give way, sinking to swallow you whole. And then through the dense fog, the path widens at last, opening like the mouth of a cave into a clearing encircled by warped trees. Their roots rise from the ground in knotted tangles, blackened and twisted as though scorched from within. Thin vines coil around their trunks, and their thorns glistening faintly in the dim light, and the air here is thick, almost gelatinous, quaking with an unseen energy that reverberates just beneath the surface. The ground is scattered with shards of bone, small, brittle fragments half buried in the soil, streaked with veins of decay. The scent is faint at first, a subtle aroma that seems to rise from the soil, enveloping your senses, the fragrance slow and deep, like the breath of something immense and sleeping beneath the ground. It fills the air with a lingering essence, a presence that feels both watchful and waiting, something older than words, older even than memory. And it is here, in the depths of this uncanny, miasmic realm, your blade begins to stir. Once cold and inert at your side, it now emits a subtle hum, resonating against your hip, a tremor spiraling up your arm like a murmured enigma threading through your bones. Deliberately, you draw it forth, the weight shifts as it emerges, the blade awakening, imbibing the fetid air. Its surface appears even darker here, the edge capturing a faint luminescence from the spectral green light seeping out of fungi clusters clinging to contorted trees. Elaborate, sinuous patterns etch the obsidian metal, veins inscribed, scarcely visible yet pulsating in unison with the quakes beneath the earth. Driven by an inexplicable urge, you set the blade aside briefly and delve into your pack. Your fingers probe deeply, searching until they brush against the shards of your former weapon. The bone cleaver. Gingerly, you extract them, their surfaces just as icy and jagged against your skin as the day you first got it. As you bring the shards closer to the blade, an uncanny energy seems to magnetize them together. The instant the shards touch the blade, a jolt surges through you, a raw electric charge burrowing deep into your bones, robbing you of breath. The metal undulates under your grip, thickening and darkening, as if absorbing the very quintessence of shadows enshrouding the clearing. The blade and shards fuse seamlessly, the fragments filling the etched patterns like pieces completing an arcane puzzle. It's as though the weapon is consuming them, assimilating their essence and becoming something greater. The blade quivers in your hand, alive with fierce, untamed energy, thrumming with a hunger as chilling as it is exhilarating. It seems to swell, taking on a life of its own, a hunger not merely felt but demanded, a force radiating outward to fill the clearing with a presence that presses upon you, insistent and undeniable. The shards have transformed it, twisting it into something darker, something that resonates with a brutal, unforgiving purpose. As you grip it, the weapon's hunger pulses through you, spreading into your veins, an icy thrill that sharpens your senses and heightens every detail. The clearing seems brighter, sharper, every sound more distinct, every shadow more vivid, as if the blade were lending you its gaze, its thirst for power. You feel a strange, visceral connection with it, as though the blade recognizes something within you, something ancient and fierce, something that mirrors its own need. A pale glow begins to ripple from the blade's edge, a white light that pulses in time with your own heartbeat, casting faint shadows that dance across the ground like spectral flames. The skeletal creatures behind you shift, their eyeless sockets drawn to the light, their limbs trembling as though in recognition. They draw closer, silent and reverent, their hollow mouths moving in strange, wordless rhythms as though they too are bound to the blade's thrall. As you turn back to the path before you, the creatures follow, their eyeless faces lifted toward you, hollow yet somehow aware, as though they see you not merely as a bearer of death, but as something of death itself. The corpse garden shadows seem to deepen as you press on, pooling into thick, oily darkness in the hollows between the trees, soaking into the underbrush as though seeping from wounds in the earth itself. There's a prickling along your skin, a tension that feels electric, as though the air is charged by some primal energy, each particle vibrating with an unseen force that seems to tighten around you, anticipating. The mist curls around your ankles, chilling your skin, wrapping you in its clammy embrace. While above, the trees arch and stretch, their branches gnarled and twisted, reaching out from a canopy as dense as it is malignant. Without warning, shadows tear away from the edge of the path, lunging with brutal speed. In an instant, they coil into vaguely canine shapes, each form stitched together from twisted roots and shards of bone. Their limbs jerk and lurch, a grotesque collision of blackened wood and pale skeletal fragments, as if assembled by some blind, frenzied hand. Before you can even draw a breath, they are upon you, jaws gaping in twisted silence, teeth of jagged roots snapping inches from your flesh, claws scraping stone as they drive you back, relentless. Without hesitation, the Marrow Hounds leap forward, skeletal paws striking the earth as they weave around you, their sharpened bone spurs flashing in the dim light. One hound, larger than the others, barrels into the nearest root beast, its jaws clamping down with a sickening crack, splintering bark and bone. Another hound latches onto a root beast's thorned limb, shaking it violently, tearing through the twisted wood with relentless ferocity. The root beasts hesitate, thrown off by the sudden assault, but they recover quickly, their eyeless heads twisting toward the hounds with a predatory malice. One root beast lunges at a hound, its bark-lined jaws snapping shut just inches from its spectral skull, but the hound twists away with a lithe, ghostly speed, its claws raking along the creature's side, leaving deep gouges that ooze blackened sap. With the Marrow Hounds buying you precious seconds, you seize the moment, Dusk's embrace pulsing fiercely with an energy in your grip. You launch yourself at the nearest root beast, slashing downward with brutal precision, the blade biting into the twisted body. As it shudders and collapses, the blade drinks deeply, leeching the creature's life force and flooding your veins with a cold, fierce vitality. You swing, parry, strike, each movement driven by raw, unyielding force as the blade hums in your hand, channeling its dark energy into every blow. With each strike, the weapon drains the strange, necrotic life from these creatures, the energy coursing through your veins, feeding a power that builds with each kill. Yet for every creature that falls, two more seem to rise, their bodies reassembling from scattered fragments, pulling themselves together with a malignant, unholy vigor. They press in closer, their attacks unrelenting, their limbs reaching, clawing, grasping and pulling at you with an insatiable drive that seems to build with every failed attempt. The ground around you is littered with the shattered remains, shards of bone and splinters of bark scattered like broken shells, yet they continue to reform, rising from the soil with a determination that defies sense. The weight of their onslaught begins to press down on you, exhaustion creeping into your limbs. Each breath is labored as you struggle against the tide of their relentless assault. You barely have a moment to breathe as the shadows shift once more. More root beasts lunging from the underbrush with jagged limbs poised. The bark-lined jaws clamp down around your leg, thorned roots digging in deep, and a hot spike of pain jolts up your thigh. You swing Dusk's embrace down, severing one of the creature's clawed limbs, but it only tightens its grip. Another root beast latches on to the front of your tunic, pulling you toward the ground, its eyeless face mere inches from yours. The Marrow Hounds react instantly, spectral forms flashing in unison as they close in on the beast latched onto you. The largest hound leaps onto its back, bone claws digging into its gnarled, bark-like hide, while others dart forward, jaws snapping around the creature's neck, tearing bark and bone with ferocious intent. With their combined strength, they wrest the creature off of you, throwing it to the ground, where they tear at its limbs in a coordinated, vicious burst, leaving it struggling under the relentless assault. But the root beasts keep coming, clawing from every direction. You rise to your feet, Dusk's embrace heavy and pulsing with necromantic energy, as yet another wave of creatures surges forward. The beasts retaliate with brutal swipes of thorned limbs and splintered maws, fighting back with relentless wrath, and the clearing devolves into chaos, an endless vexing fray of snapping jaws, twisting roots, and spectral howls. You press forward, striking again and again, each swing of Dusk's embrace feeding your dark strength with every creature felled. But the power is fleeting, and exhaustion pulls at your limbs. Each breath is heavier than the last. The ground is thick with shattered roots and glistening black sap, and you realize with a mounting dread that you aren't able to keep this up. In one terrible moment, the largest Marrow Hound, covered in sap and wounds, is knocked aside, its spectral form flickering as a root beast rips into its ribcage, scattering bone fragments across the clearing. The other two hounds falter, weakened and outnumbered, their once coordinated attacks breaking down into desperate snaps and lunges. And then, barely able to raise Dusk's embrace to strike again, a final wave of root beasts swarms you, clawed limbs pinning you down to the ground. You struggle, feeling the blade pulse weakly in your hand. Your strength ebbs, and the weight of their bodies insurmountable, crushing the last of your resistance. The Marrow Hounds' howls fade into the distance as the beasts overwhelm them. The clearing is consumed in a cacophony of snapping wood and tearing flesh. A dark blur cuts through the fog, a streak of vicious intent slicing through the swarm of root beasts clawing at you. It moves in a blur, lightning-like limbs crackling at unnatural angles as it dives into the closest creature, its fingers stabbing deep into its bark-like hide. With a sickening twist, it pulls, ripping the root beast in half as sap and fragments of wood spill onto the damp earth. The attacker's face is locked in a grim, silent snarl, a glint of violent satisfaction flickering across its sharp features. It's Mara. Before the other creatures can react, Mara is upon them. She lunges with a predator's precision, each movement a fluid blend of savagery and grace, her body contorting as she twists, claws digging deep into another root beast's throat. With a snap of her wrist, she pulls it apart, its shattered remains raining down onto her feet in a heap of root and bone. Her head jerks back, sunken eyes snapping toward the next threat. A guttural growl escapes her lips, and a sinister smile spreads across her face, signaling the hunt isn't over. You struggle to rise, adrenaline pulsing through your veins as you watch her carve through the creatures like a tempest. The root beasts recoil, but Mara shows them no mercy. She moves in relentless pursuit, her lithe body twisting in midair, landing on the back of another beast with a wet crunch, tearing through its twisted limbs with a single, savage movement. Each kill feeds her malice, and you can see the years of bitterness and agony burning in her eyes as she rips them apart one by one, her retribution unleashed in every strike. The final root beast charges toward her, its maw open wide, thorned limbs reaching. Mara sidesteps, letting it stumble forward before catching it mid-stride. She pulls her hands back and with a guttural snarl drives her claws into its chest, splitting it apart with a fury that seems to rattle the very air. The creature crumples, its remains dissolving into the soil like ash. And for a moment, silence falls, broken only by the sound of Mara's heavy breaths, her shoulders rising and falling as she surveys the fallen. Her eyes, cold and distant, finally meet yours. Without a word, she crosses the distance between you in a fluid, silent motion, her form now towering above you. Her clawed hand hovers, as if uncertain, before she grasps your arm, pulling you to your feet with a strength that surprises you. She looks at you, dried blood and sap covering her leather-like body. Her nails begin to slowly dig into your arm, and the unhinged smile begins to spread back across her face. In the same moment, her brow furrows, and she quickly releases you. She slinks down to all fours, still almost as tall as you, and shambles back to wherever she came from. The clearing falls silent, twisted roots and shattered branches scattered like the remnants of a brutal ritual. Around you, a crushing stillness fills the air, as though the grove itself refuses to breathe, and it's watching with a keen awareness that feels almost alive. It's as if the garden itself had been waiting for this moment, for you to stand here in its heart, and the sensation creeps into your mind, a subtle, inescapable feeling that you're still not alone. After the brutal struggle and the chaos, you stumble from the twisted pits of the corpse garden, aching and bloodied. The air is still thick, but now it carries an odd quiet, a hesitant peace that settles around you. You limp down a winding path until you reach a sheltered grove, where the noise of battle fades and the garden's pulse becomes a gentle, distant hum. Here in the savage hollow, you finally lower yourself to the ground. The weight of Dusk's embrace rests beside you, its dark energy dimmed after the relentless fray, leaving a stillness in your grip that feels almost foreign. Every muscle protests, and your wounds throb with a dull, persistent ache, but the quiet invites a kind of surrender. As you breathe, the pain ebbs slightly, replaced by a strange, reflective clarity. You let your gaze drift over the grove, its twisted roots softened by the mist, and memories of recent fights resurface. The Ferryman, Bathhouse, Matriarch, the Bound Sentinel, thick and thin, and the fate of Mara, the Archivist. The scenes replay in flashes. And as you reflect finally on the fight against the root beasts, something becomes strangely evident. The garden did not merely resist you, it adapted, each root and vine reacting with something akin to sentience. As you settle back, a thought surfaces, rising slowly and uncomfortably. The garden had seemed to recognize you, as though your presence was not unwelcome but expected. The roots recoiled, the beasts reformed, the Marrow Hounds were summoned, all while the land itself watched. Another breath steadies you, and the heavy, heady scent of damp earth fills your lungs. It's comforting in an eerie way, grounding you as you consider the pull you felt. Not just to survive, but to continue this journey that's forged in both blood and purpose. Your grip tightens briefly around Dusk's embrace, feeling the power in its blade that was both a blessing and a burden, feeding off the dark energy of the creatures you slew. The fog begins to thin slightly, soft light breaking through the canopy above, illuminating the grove in a muted shade. For now, you allow yourself a few more breaths, acknowledging that each scar and every ache is a testament to the garden's trials. Rest will not undo the path that lies ahead, nor the dark pull that continues to draw you forward, but it grants you a moment's peace, a rare pause in the depths of the garden's dark heart. You then rise to your feet, and you continue into the heart of the corpse garden. Ahead, the mist parts, revealing a narrow, winding path that disappears deeper into the garden. The trees arch overhead, enclosing you in a twisted organic corridor. The trunks swell and contort, resembling sinewy muscle bound tight against ancient bone, and the path beneath your feet is slick with dark moss that squelches underfoot, as though swallowing each step as you press onward. The path grows narrow, and the air thickens, heavy with the scent of rot and damp earth. Pale fungi cling to the trunks, their caps marked with bruised, dark blotches, releasing a faintly metallic odor that lingers on your tongue. There is a faint rhythmic sound, a slow, pulsing hum that seems to echo from the earth itself, syncing with the dull, anxious beat of your own heart. Finally, the corridor widens, opening into a circular clearing where the ground is dark and bare, stripped of even the hardiest roots. The air here is thicker, and as you step forward, you feel it press against your skin, resistant. At the center of this desolate space sits a throne unlike anything you've ever seen. A grotesque mass of roots, rock, and flesh. The roots twist and weave around thick, fleshy vines that pulse faintly, rising from the earth as if clawing upward. There's an organic desperation in the way the throne has taken shape, as if it wasn't built but grown from a need, a hunger that drove the garden to mold itself into this strange, regal seat. In the dim, filtered light, you can make out faint engravings cut into the root that make up the throne. Ancient symbols and formed figures writhe across its surface, spiraling around each other in intricate, chaotic patterns that seem to shift when you're not looking directly at them. Some symbols are familiar, fragments of languages or spells you've seen scrawled in ruins in forgotten spaces, but others are strange, impossible to decipher, as though they belong to an ancient tongue spoken only by the grove itself. At the base of the throne, a shallow pool of dark liquid reflects the twisted canopy above. The surface is unnaturally still, as though it's holding something deep beneath, a secret that lies just out of reach. Faint wisps of mist drift above it, their edges tinged with a sickly green glow that hints at something toxic, something dangerous. Every now and then, a ripple disturbs the surface, though there's no wind, no movement to explain it. Something is stirring within, just below the surface, bound to the throne and waiting for its own moment to rise. You suddenly feel it intensify in your bones, the ancient rhythm like a heartbeat screaming from deep within the earth. Slowly, in synchrony with this beat, the liquid in the pool begins to rise, not spilling over the edges, but lifting as though gravity itself has bent to some dark command. Limbs of shadow and mist wrap around the rising mass, swollen and irregular, each movement shaping it further into the semblance of a body. And as the figure solidifies, the glow around the symbols dims, fading into the wood and leaving only the tangible, physical presence of the one who now occupies the throne. Upon a throne of fused roots and hardened earth, a figure slumps, draped in the brittle remains of a tattered robe. Across the pool, he rises, massive and terrible, like some deathless monarch dragged back from beyond. His body's a brutal construct of rotting flesh and exposed muscle, bound by iron plates that dig into his twisted form, barbed and soaked with the blood of countless battles. From the crown of his helm, vertebrae and ribs jut out like cruel antlers, a dark halo that glistens with a dark, coagulated blood, every spike and edge a trophy from those who dared challenge him before.
"Come closer,"
he murmurs, his voice a guttural rasp, like bark cracking under immense weight.
"You've journeyed far, but here all things come to rest."
As his words fill the clearing, the roots around you tremble, awakening with sinister intent. They begin to twist, then rise like vipers coiling around your ankles. Thick, thorn vines surge from the earth, snaking up your legs and wrapping around your torso, each constriction of the roots syncing with your own heartbeat. They begin to crush you immediately. You struggle against the tightening embrace, hacking desperately with your blade, severing vine after vine. Yet for every root you slice, two more rise to replace it, each as eager to entangle as the last. Thorns bite into your flesh, tearing through cloth and skin, leaving streaks of red that mingle with the pungent scent of crushed greenery, a cloying, sickly sweet aroma that fills your lungs, choking your senses. The figure observes your struggle, his cruel grin widening, his regal gaze fixed upon you with a satisfaction that chills. His voice fills the clearing again, rich with grim authority, each word a commandment that settles deep within you.
There is no escape. In this garden of life and ruin, your breath feeds the soil, and through it, I am reborn.
The roots underfoot pulse with vile vitality, wood and soil unmasked, now twisted sinews of flesh and shards of bone, erupting from the ground in an endless writhing mass. Each step squelches with a sickening sound of flesh grinding against flesh, an obscene symphony of life's twisted necromantic power. The air reeks of blood and decay, thick and cloying, filling your lungs with each ragged breath. With a rattling snarl, he extends his arm, and the roots obey, heaving upward in an obscene tide of flesh and bone, forming a spear in his grip, thick and pulsing, dripping with a dark arterial fluid. He thrusts it downward with a force that splits the ground beneath you, sending a spray of dark blood and fragments of bone into the air. Each impact is a visceral explosion, splattering the ground in a crimson rain as his spear swings again and again, each strike tearing through the makeshift battlefield, carving trenches of gore into the earth. The roots continue to lash out like tendons wrapping around your ankles, wrenching you back each time you try to break free. You slice at them, hacking through the sinewy lengths with your blade, but each severed root only seems to call forth more, spilling thick, viscous blood that splatters your face and hands, making the blade slippery and hard to grip. And with a roar, he sweeps his spear in a wide arc, and the flesh-bound roots respond, lunging from all sides. The massive tendrils strike like the limbs of a colossal beast, each one tipped with jagged bone ripping into you with brutal precision. They tear through your skin, slicing open gashes that bleed freely, mixing with the dark ichor that already stains the ground. You stagger, vision blurring as your blood flows, soaking into the earth that now pulses with a twisted, hungry life of its own. Through the red haze of pain, you can see him grinning, savoring each of your wounds, every drop of blood spilled, feeling the twisted energy of the garden around you. His voice cuts through the din, deep and mocking.
Look at you.
He sneers, lifting his spear high, roots writhing around him in celebration.
Another lifeblood sacrificed to the garden of bone.
Your body trembles, every movement sending fresh pain lancing through you, your strength ebbing with each passing second. You lunge at him, Dusk's embrace in hand, swinging with all you have left, but he deflects your blow with a laugh, his spear sweeping low and knocking you to the ground. You feel a sharp crack as you land, your ribs screaming in protest, your breath shallow and ragged as you lie sprawled in the blood-soaked earth. The roots tighten around your arms and legs, pinning you down, their edges digging into flesh, drawing yet more blood that seeps into the soil. His gaze bores into you triumphant as he raises his spear above his head, preparing for a final blow. You feel the coldness of death creeping in, stealing your strength, pulling you under. Your heartbeat slowing as the blood loss takes its toll. Darkness seeps into the edge of your vision, your body refusing to respond. The grip on your weapon slipping as your life drains into the ravenous soil. The last thing you see is the twisted form of the spear descending, a flash of necrotic energy crackling around it, blurring the world as you feel the last vestiges of strength slip away. A pulse, raw and violent, erupts in your chest as the black scar above your heart ignites, searing through the darkness like a spark in a dry field. The wound, closed by necromantic rites, flares to life, and with it a brutal ancient power courses through you, ripping you back from the edge of death. The Bone Sovereign's crown, nestled within your wrist, grows unbearably hot, as if responding to the scar's dark call, blazing with stolen life and strength. Dusk's embrace, barely clutched in your weakened grip, trembles and awakens, its own life-draining hunger stirring, resonating with the crown's eldritch power. A deep, guttural roar wells up from within you, and possessed by a savage wrath, you claw your way back to your feet, fury pouring into every blood-soaked limb. Necromantic tendrils spread from your scar, stitching your wound shut with a grim, terrible force. The air fills with the scent of burning, of flesh bound together by dark rites, and the sensation is raw agony, yet it births an unholy strength within you. The garden's roots recoil, hissing as the blackened scar defies their touch, as if the dead themselves rise in rebellion within your veins. The blood-soaked earth around you quakes, sensing the fury brewing within you, as if the garden itself cannot contain this awakened, raging force. With a feral scream, you swing Dusk's embrace, the weapon thrumming with a newfound vicious energy, a dark flame coursing along its edge. You tear through the roots that dared bind you, each slice draining life back into your flesh, the cursed blade devouring the garden's power, leaving nothing but a bloodied ruin in its wake. Your body is raw, driven by a force beyond mortal rage, a disaster of necromantic fury brought back from the edge. He watches, his smoldering eyes narrowing, the hint of a falter in his cruel grin. He raises his spear again, but you're already there, crashing into him with the force of boundless rage. Your blade bites into his flesh, through bone and muscle, each strike feeding the rage boiling within you, consuming the energy he tried to steal. His once commanding form trembles, pieces of the armor and sinew cracking, a dark ichor spilling into the soil as you hammer blow after blow into him, fueled by the same death that nearly claimed you. He staggers, his own necromantic might failing to hold him together, the roots around him wilting and slumping, drained of the life they siphoned from the soil. His spear clatters to the ground, his hands clutching the gaping wounds across his chest, his gaze hollowed by the realization he cannot suppress. Your vision blurs red with fury as you unleash a final brutal strike, Dusk's embrace sinking deep into his chest, devouring the last remnants of his power. His body shudders as cracks spread through him, the necromantic energy unraveling, the terrible cursed life force he wielded dissipating into the air. His mouth opens in a voiceless scream, his face contorted with rage, disbelief, and finally terror as his body collapses inward, consumed by the very forces he sought to command. As his twisted form crumbles into nothing, the roots retreat. The bloodied, pulsating tendrils shrivel back into the ground, leaving you standing in the dead patch, breathing heavily and raw, Dusk's embrace still humming with hunger, the crown of the bone sovereign thrumming with dark power on your wrist. Yet you stand there, blood-soaked and trembling. But you are victorious. The twisted roots that once writhed with hunger now lie still, skeletal remains scattered across the blood-soaked ground, stripped of the power that animated them. The corpse garden seems to exhale, recognizing the shift in power. Something compels you forward, a subtle pull guiding you toward a hollow where a strange, faint light dances upon the soil, illuminating a small altar covered in ancient, faded runes. Fragments of old bones and relics litter the ground around it, remnants of those who have dared to tread here before. Stepping closer, you feel the energy of the garden concentrate around the altar. The symbiotic crown lies at its center, no longer a part of the host, yet still radiating dark allure. The crown's bone fragments gleam faintly, whispering promise of power in a language you can barely comprehend, an offer of dominion over the garden, to become its new keeper, its new conduit. Your black scars burn again, the same dark pulse that saved you before now urging you forward, compelling you to reach out. As your fingers graze the crown, an electric shock ripples through your body, binding you in place. Visions flood your mind, the faces of countless souls lost to the garden, their life forces twisted, repurposed, sustaining its dark vitality. And then the moment your fingers lay steady on the symbiotic crown, a ripple of raw energy pulses through the air. Yet, almost immediately, the Bone Sovereign's crown on your right arm surges with an indomitable force, and you feel its presence like an iron weight pressing down upon your mind. The symbiotic crown, glistening wetly, begins to shudder, its seductive power faltering as it senses the ancient authority of the Bone Sovereign's crown. The symbiotic fronds within the crown twitch and retract, seeming to cower, as though in reverence or fear. The faint whispers that had once beckoned you are drowned out, replaced by an oppressive silence, and the air itself thickens with a gravity that feels both electrifying and terrifying. The Bone Sovereign's influence radiates outward, commanding submission, binding the symbiotic crown into a subservient thrall. Its once strong aura dims, reduced to a pale shadow under the Sovereign's relentless dominance. Your hand hovers over the symbiotic crown, now subdued. Its once defiant aura cowed beneath the Bone Sovereign's relentless authority. With a final, resolute breath, you reach out and grasp it fully. The crown's surface, a disturbing blend of hardened root and pulsing flesh, is warm to the touch, almost unsettlingly alive. As you lift it, the crown twitches, the fibrous roots slithering with anticipation. And then, as if sensing its place, it jerks violently and lunges toward your left arm. It's not a gentle integration, but a ravenous assault. The roots pierce into your skin and burrow deep into your flesh. Pain flares, sharp and electric, as the tendrils weave beneath the surface, spiraling around bones, threading through muscle. You grit your teeth, feeling each root as it finds purchase, writhing and pulsing in time with your heartbeat, merging its essence with your own. The crown's invasive presence spreads upward, lacing up through your forearm, twisting over your wrist, until it settles, encircling your wrist like an otherworldly brand of thorns and sinew. In this moment of amalgamation, the crowns seem to merge their energies, a dark synergy woven between them. The symbiotic essence of the now subjugated crown flows into your veins, augmenting the power of the Bone Sovereign's crown and forging a bond between them. You feel your own life essence intertwine with the ancient life force held captive within the symbiotic crown, its residual memories and vitality drawn upon under the sovereignty of your own will. The garden around you trembles, almost sentient in its awareness, as the authority of the Bone Sovereign settles over every root, leaf, and stone, binding it to your command. The pain fades to a shimmering ache, replaced by a strange, consuming warmth, a union between you and this living relic. Your left arm feels heavy, yet there's an undeniable surge of strength within it, a vitality stolen from the life that once sustained the symbiotic crown. You can feel the garden's essence now, a pulse that echoes through the roots embedded in your arm, connecting you to the soil beneath your feet, to every vine and branch within the corpse garden. As the last root settles into your flesh, the garden around you shivers, acknowledging the new bond. The symbiotic crown has not merely become an artifact you wield, it is now a part of you, a living, breathing power fused within your flesh, inseparable from your being. As you take a deep, steadying breath, the soreness in your face sharpens into an uncomfortable awareness. Raising your hand to your cheek, you feel a network of rough, raised lines, cold beneath your touch. Black scars, remnants of the crown's frenzied and necromantic healing, now etched across your skin like marks of a dark ritual. Each scar radiates a faint, unnatural coldness, a reminder of the life you reclaimed from the edge of death, of the power that now binds you to the Bone Sovereign, and now the symbiotic crown. The reflection of these scars, their morbid beauty, strikes a chord of unease within you, forged within your flesh by forces beyond life and death. It's a weight that feels heavy on your spirit, as it does your skin, a stark witness to the path you've begun to walk. Your hand slips to your waist, fingers brushing against a cold, familiar object. The ferryman's mask. The memory of the man in white flickers in your mind, his silent passing. With a sense of reverence, you lift the mask and secure it over your face, feeling its cool, smooth surface settle into place. Through the hollow eyes of the mask, a sense of concealment is offered. As the mask's edges press against your skin, a peculiar sensation ripples through the air. The grove around you seems to shift. The path that once appeared closed off or tangled with roots is now parting as if under a spell. Your mask's influence seems to resonate with the essence of the garden, granting you a passageway visible only to those marked by death's touch in the mask of the ferryman. The new path ahead is unmistakable, a winding trail that seems to almost glow beneath the filtered light. Shadows linger at the edge, twisting and reshaping as if alive, guiding you deeper into the forest. Each step feels welcomed, the ground beneath your feet somehow softer, and more yielding, as if even the garden now acknowledges your newfound dominion. With the mask secure and the symbiotic crown fused to your arm, you walk upon the hidden path, leaving the corpse garden. Hey guys, Ailey here. Just wanted to say a quick thank you for listening to my story. This was the second installment of hopefully 5 for this specific character in AshenBound. This is probably going to be more of a mainstay on the channel. I really like writing this. I've also developed a GPT to help me or really anyone flesh out ideas or items, weapons, whole sequences, characters, whatever for the AshenBound universe. If you come up with something that you like, you can submit it to r/AshenBound and I might check it out. I will also take just original entries for AshenBound and probably read those. I already have a couple of authors working on some stories. I have someone who's already done with the story that will be narrated here soon, all in the AshenBound universe. So feel free to check out that Reddit, check out that GPT. Thank you for being here. Oh, on the GPT, ask it who the Muffin Man is. Do it. Who's the Muffin Man?